Hey guys, tonight we drift down the Nile at the exact moment day remembers to be quiet and night remembers to be kind. The water breathes against the bank with that barely there hush you hear when a page turns, and somewhere a heron lifts its skinny knees like a librarian tiptoeing after hours. You feel warm stone under your sandals, the late sun cooling on your shoulders, and the kind of breeze that smells faintly of river mud and crushed papyrus stalks. You're stepping into a regular evening, except your job isn't regular. You're on the night shift with Egyptian scribes, sharpening reeds and steadying lamps while most of the city curls up under linen. You probably won't survive this, at least not without yawning so wide a scarab could park in there. But that's the charm. You're here to coast, to drift, to let letters carry you to sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, tell me where you are and what time it is. I love imagining this river winding past your city, too. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the water's edge where the bank slopes in a gentle linen fold, and the Nile is a scroll unrolling into darkness. Boats bump the mud with small, respectful thuds, as if apologizing for being awake. A ferryman's pole taps the riverbed, the sound hollow and patient, and you take it as your cue to breathe slower. The horizon still holds a ribbon of mango-orange light, but the blue is winning, and the first star blinks like a nailhead hammered into the sky. The night shift, for you, starts with listening for where the city ends and the scriptorium begins. A fact floats up, as dependable as the current. Scribes are the memory of the state. In Egypt, being a scribe can lift you above fieldwork and brick carrying, away from sunburned shoulders and toward tidy benches, reed pens and a small knife tucked at your belt. You write in hieratic, cursive, fast, elegant, like hieroglyphs that changed into linen slippers for the evening, and you carry a palette with two little wells, black for the body of the text, red for headings, totals, names that need a little ceremony. Black comes from soot mixed with gum and water, red from ochre. It's practical, simple, and it works so well that parts of the system last centuries. You don't mention any of that out loud. You just hold it in your chest like a secret candle. Near your ankle, a strip of papyrus tickles your skin. You nudge it aside with your toe, noticing how the fibers run one way, then the other, like rushes combed and recombed until they agree to lie flat. That's papyrus in a nutshell. Slices of pith from the papyrus plant, laid crosswise, pressed, dried, polished smooth with a stone. Mainstream fact, sure, but it feels different when a curl of it hugs your foot as if to say, "Hey, you're writing on cousins tonight." You smile, the smile people wear when the office supplies are also plants by the door. A soft clatter to your left. A boy runs by with a basket of lamp wicks, the sound like dry seeds tipping in a gourd. He pauses long enough to give you that look every apprentice gives a new night worker, a mixture of curiosity and relief. Curiosity, because everyone wants to know who else volunteers for the moon hours. Relief, because someone else will be awake with them. You nod, grave as a senior cat, and he darts on. Your steps carry you along the quayside, past storage doors painted with quick fish marks and tally lines. A guard leans on a spear, half listening to a reed flute from a courtyard. He smells of oil and the mild, toasty sweetness of barley beer. You swear you can taste the nutty hint from here. First joke. In a world without coffee, barley beer is basically a yeasty smoothie, which is a terrible beverage name, but an outstanding bedtime story. A cat streaks between jars, tail high, on an eternal mouse audit that wouldn't pass any modern board's metrics but has old-school charm. You keep your pace lazy, almost ASMR slow as the street narrows. The city begins to speak in textures instead of voices. Brick cooling, plaster shedding a little powder. A palm frond brushing a wall with the exact sound of a hand across linen. You feel the small, comfortable heft of your kit. A reed knife, a string-bound palette, a handful of ostraca. Those broken pottery shards and limestone flakes scribes use for drafts and lists. That's your quirky tidbit tonight. Ancient scratch paper wasn't paper at all. It was yesterday's pot, doing a second career as tomorrow's to-do list. You pat the bundle at your hip like someone checking for their phone, and chuckle at yourself. Second joke. You resist the urge to put the shard on Do Not Disturb, which, given its mood, is already its natural setting. You round a corner where a fig tree leans like a nosy aunt peeking from a balcony, and the air cools again. You watch a thin line of smoke uncurl from a brazier. Someone burning Kyphi. The nocturnal incense that smells like wine and honey had a polite meeting with cinnamon and agreed to whisper. It's soothing enough to make you forgive the mosquitoes, who arrive like gate crashers wearing invisible tuxedos. You wave them away, diplomatic. The night has its bureaucracy. Even the bugs must file forms. Above you, the first belt of stars begins to shine. One of the brightest, you know from training, is Sopdet, Sirius, which once signaled the flooding season when it rose before dawn. Historians still argue whether the exact calendar adjustments for that heliacal rising were standardized across every region or kept locally, guarded like temple recipes that vary by pinch and handful. You let the debate drift past like a slow boat. Tonight, the star is simply a bead on an endless string. It doesn't need to be precise to be calming. You pause at a low wall warmed by the day and sit for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to lamp range. A donkey calls once with that rusty hinge voice donkeys have, and then decides that was plenty of communication for one evening. You agree. You watch the lamp smoke loosen and thread itself into the sky. A palm leaf shakes, and the shadow of its frond becomes a gigantic handwriting across the plaster. The knight practicing hieratic before you do. The wall, to its credit, does not miss a stroke. Third joke, you consider offering the wall your palette, but it's already overqualified. We should be practical, too, because the night shift is more than ribboned phrases and incense. Your body knows the drill. Befriend the quiet. Pace yourself like a water clock, not a sandstorm. The scribe's room you're heading toward, across a few alleys and a courtyard, isn't glamorous. It's efficient. Benches, low tables, pallets lined like sleeping swallows. Oil lamps in stone saucers or small stands, their wicks trimmed short so they don't smoke too much, though any safety officer from the future would faint and write a strongly worded papyrus about open flames near flammable writing material. The lamps run on castor oil or animal fat, depending on budget and mood. Both smell like "please open a window," which the night thankfully provides. Another fact pads up to your shoulder and rests there. Many scribes serve temples or state granaries. Their work is the circulation system of grain, labor, and offerings. Lists, receipts, letters, hymns, legal notes, and copies of older texts. your bench will see them all. But that's for later tonight. For now, you sink into the hour when all the worries become small, negotiable lines. You rehearse your first task in your head. Greet the supervisor with that balanced respect. Enough deference to keep harmony. Enough ease to keep your hand steady. You will measure breaths by lamp flickers, thoughts by the footfall of sandals on packed earth, time by how often the wick needs pinching. A breeze lifts from the river again. You catch the wet, sweet smell and imagine the papyrus marshes whispering like a million tiny brushes. Somewhere, out there in the reeds, a fisherman pulls in a net and slides a finger along a rope to feel if anything answers. You mirror him, sliding a thumb along the reed pen at your belt to feel whether the nib will answer when the first stroke asks its question. Before you rise, you glance back at the boats. Someone hums a tune in a 3-note rise and fall, the kind that needs no lyrics and carries no urgency. It's the soundtrack of patient work, and it suits you. The moon, not yet high, edges the jars and the spear tips and the cat's whiskers in the faintest silver. The city is ready to write itself into being again, one line at a time, in black and red, with the occasional smudge declaring, "A human made this." You stand, roll your shoulders, and let your hands find their comfortable weight. The ferryman pushes off, the pole's end making that deep bowl echo again, as if the river were agreeing to keep your secrets. You round the last curve of the quay, the alley ahead narrowing like a throat preparing to whisper. There's the quiet you've been waiting for, thick but breathable, like cloth that's been washed 100 times. You walk into it, slow as a thought, toward the door where light threads the threshold like the first line of a long, calm sentence. The door with the thin spill of lamplight opens to your knuckles, as if the wood has been taught good manners. You let the alley have its last quiet say before you step inside. The lane is narrow enough that your shoulders collect cool from both walls. Plaster brushes your linen the way a cat pretends it isn't greeting you. A watchman raises his palm, not to stop you, just to note your orbit through his little planet of shadow. His spear butt taps the ground once. Tick, a line on an invisible water clock, and the sound folds neatly back into the hush. A donkey drifts out of a side court with the dignified uncertainty of a local official at a neighborhood bake sale. Its panniers tap together, and the grain inside murmurs like a pocket sea. You rest your palm against its neck, and the animal releases a sigh so complete you consider bottling it as a stress remedy. First joke, limited edition donkey exhale. Notes of hay, undertones of "I did my best today." The handler's easy friend floats after you, and the city edits itself smaller again. Sandals, soft grit, lamp glow widening just enough to guide your toes. You pass a doorway where a brazier glows low and respectful. The scent is lamp oil with a hint of acacia gum. The same gum that will bind soot into ink later. A small tree offering 2 jobs to the same moon. You listen for the scriptorium the way you listened for the river. Not for voices, but for arrangements. A row of benches breathes differently than a market. A stack of pallets hums more softly than jars. And there, under the hush, you catch it, the delicate stop-and-go scratch of reed on ostrakhan, the sound of thought turning into a line. A mainstream fact pads alongside you. Many temple and administrative complexes keep dedicated rooms for writing, some gathered into the temple, house of life, the Per-Ankh, part library, part school, part archive. Texts are copied and taught there. medicine, and ritual also live under its roof. Tonight's room borrows that rhythm even if it sits off an ordinary courtyard rather than a grand hypo-style hall. The doorway does no boasting. The work inside has no need of trumpets. You pause at the threshold so your eyes can set their dimness to polite. The lamp smell, castor and wick, says you're in the right place. The air is a degree cooler, the way stone turns kindly once the sun stops asking favors. Inside, benches stand in tidy parallels as comforting as ruled lines. On a side shelf, water jars stopped with clay, a small box of pumice for smoothing rough spots, and a handsome row of pallets laid out like sleeping fish, each with its paired wells for black and red. Geometry calms you. Straight boards, shallow bowls, predictable shadows. If you listen carefully, you hear administrative dramas that will never make a poem. The soft clink of a seal ring against a jar, the gentle scrape of a knife cleaning a nib, a cough politely taught to disappear into a sleeve. Two scribes at work glance up, not to challenge you, merely to add you to the constellation of people who will carry this night together. One mouths a greeting, the other lifts his chin by a friendly degree. It's the office equivalent of birds acknowledging other birds. No fuss, just shared air. You set your kit at a vacant bench, but hold off unpacking. Your palm rests on the wood. It's been burnished by years of wrists and forearms, and you can nearly read the ghost notes of other nights there. Someone's smile when a line came out right. Someone's foot bouncing as they waited for a rubric to dry. You pinch the lamp wick shorter with wetted fingers, and the smoke, rebuked, decides it has better places to be. Second joke. You consider drafting a formal apology to your lungs on an ostracon, but the shard is already on Do Not Disturb. A quirky tidbit for your pocket. Ostraca here sometimes carry practice animals. A cat chasing a goose, a mouse pretending to be a scribe, tiny satirical scenes scribbled during breaks. There the sticky notes of an amused bureaucracy, proof that margins like a smile. Your favorite shard on the shelf shows a small donkey with an exaggerated scroll in its teeth, auditioning to be chief archivist. Someone gave the donkey eyebrows. This is scholarship at its gentlest. You make a slow circuit before sitting, a ritual that tunes both spine and soul. Each lamp throws a patient halo. The shadows of reed pens cross the walls like bouquets of narrow leaves. Near the back, an older scribe tends a water clock, clepsydra chipped but dignified. He pours, marks a line on a slat, and the descending thread of water whispers with the attitude of a deadline that isn't actually urgent. You find your breath matching it. Steady, droplet, steady. The room abandons the day's vertical tempo and leans into the horizontal pace of the night. The supervisor sits near the doorway with a bundle of documents tied in palm fiber. He wears that thin calm people get when they know where everything goes, and trust it will get there in its own time. A small gesture offers you the bench you've chosen, and he returns to sorting. You catch glimpses in the stack, a receipt for grain upriver, a short hymn for morning ritual, a polite request for more baskets in the granary. You tuck the list away as background music. Your task for the moment is simpler. Align your body with the bench, and let the night accept you. You sit, let your shoulders lower, and slide your palate closer. The wood holds a faint smoke salt from old fingers. From the shelf above, a little faience frog bobs on a thread in the lamp draft like a patient metronome. Perhaps it's luck. Perhaps it's an in-joke about hopping from line to line. You decide to ask later, when words feel more like smooth fish You can guide with 2 fingertips and less like pebbles in a shallow stream. The room's coolness isn't cold. It's the sort of cool that agrees to cradle your thoughts without squeezing them. A moth investigates your flame and then, reconsidering, chooses the window. You admire its decision-making. Outside, footsteps pass, then pass again, then shrink to a rumor. You rub your thumb against your forefinger and feel a faint residue of river air, as if the Nile insists on keeping one finger on your work, too. Another small fact lands softly. At Deir el-Medina, village of tomb workers, scribes kept strict ration lists: bread, beer, fish, and noted absences with tiny excuses that feel like whispers from real throats. Someone had a toothache. Someone's mother was ill. Someone went to fetch stone. You think of those careful lines as you inhale lamp smell and set your elbows just so. Every mark is a life escorted into memory. The watchman outside adjusts his stance. Leather creaks, then rests. The donkey from the alley offers a contented snuffle, which is a scientifically proven morale booster. Third joke. You briefly consider hiring the donkey as an assistant, but its salary demands are unreasonable. 3 carats nightly, plus 1 day off for braying practice. The supervisor clears his throat in a key the room understands, and everyone settles half a degree deeper into their benches. Historians still argue whether the Per-Ankh functioned as a formal, staffed institution with curriculum, or a looser designation for any temple space where healing, ritual, and text overlapped. At this hour, it feels like both, highly organized and gloriously improvisational. The benches are a syllabus. The lamp smoke is a suggestion box. The water clock is a kindly bell schedule. The walls are lined with shelves, fresh rolls, practice tablets, a drift of ostraca waiting for lists to be born. You notice string, clay ceilings impressed with careful symbols, and a neat pile of papyrus offcuts ready to become something small. Labels, bookmarks, patient fragments. Above, roof beams release the day's warmth in long exhalations, turning the air into a shawl placed by someone who knows your size. A gecko clicks once, then again, a tiny metronome that thinks it invented time. There is no announcement to begin. You are already beginning. The elder at the water clock makes a mark, returns to his bench, and leans into his first line. Across from you, a younger scribe flexes a wrist, loosens fingers, and fans ostraca like thin, broken moons. The room wears competence the way linen wears starch, lightly, without bragging. Every sound is a deliberate kindness to every other sound. You glance at the wall and find, at eye level, a smudge shaped like a feather. It calls up the feather of Mayat, the balance principle, the ideal lightness inside order. Historians still argue whether scribal schooling enfolded explicit moral instruction alongside pen technique, or whether ethics emerged mainly from context and temple routine. Either way, the feather smudge makes a calm promise. Keep the line true, and the night will help you. You breathe out. The bench accepts you. The scriptorium accepts you. You have navigated alleys, watchmen, and donkey diplomacy, and now the lamp bead waits with modest enthusiasm. The room's order settles into your muscles like a map you can follow with your eyes closed. Your hand hovers over the reed bundle without choosing, promising the pens their moment. Soon, not yet. First comes this: the cool, the quiet, the feeling that everything has slid into its proper groove, and that your task is as simple and as large as breathing ink into silence. You finally choose a reed, the tidy, practical hero of the night, and lay it across your palm as if introducing 2 old friends, your hand and the hours. The stalk came from a marsh fringe upriver, cut after the heat eased, its green long gone to a straw gold that whispers when you turn it. You measure a finger's width from the tip and feel for the place where the fibers promise to behave. The knife in your other hand knows the choreography. Notch, slice, pare, and breathe. A soft shaving curls away and lands on the bench like a tiny papyrus boat that has already reached port. The nib is an angled beak, neat enough to make neatness happen. You trim it in a shallow V, then nick a slit down the center so ink can nest and flow. Mainstream fact: Egyptian scribes used reed pens, the calamus, cut to a chisel edge, perfect for the quick, compact strokes of hieratic and the steady outlines of hieroglyphs alike. The angle makes thick and thin happen without drama. Pressure becomes punctuation. You turn the pen and try it in the air. It writes an invisible sentence that says, patiently, yes. You test the elastic with a thumb press, and the reed answers with a tiny give, like a cat agreeing to be petted exactly 3 times. A lamp sighs. You reach for an ostrakhan, yesterday's pot reborn as today's rehearsal, and wet the nib in a cup where water waits with bureaucratic patience. The first dip is only water, the way a singer hums nonsense syllables before lyrics return. On the shard's dusty face, the nib leaves a faint suggestion of lines. That's your cue. You dab into the black ink well where soot and gum have softened to a friendly paste and draw a trial line. It comes out like a silk thread laid on clay. You tilt the shard to the lamp. The stroke shines, then settles, then darkens all the way through as the gum hugs the surface. You write a small bird, the tidy quail chick, and a rushing stroke beside it, feeling for how the slit breathes between them. The first line always feels like a hello you've practiced in a mirror. First joke, you resist the urge to introduce the pen formally to the ostrakhan. Nib, meet shard, shard, nib, please be kind. But they're already hitting it off. Another reed waits. You cut it for italics in a life that doesn't have italics, just angle options, a little broader for bold, a little finer for the hairlines of tiny totals. You smooth the underside with a quick kiss to the whetstone, and then, yes, a literal kiss of another kind. You moisten the fibers with your tongue to soften the split, a trick apprentices learn faster than posture. Quirky tidbit. Plenty of scribes used spit to tame a nib in a pinch. Your mouth is the quietest workshop in the room. It tastes like slightly smoky marsh, which is better than it sounds and still not a beverage. You keep a small sponge nearby too, soaked, wrung, peaceful, as a more respectable method. Historians still argue whether, in earlier periods, some texts were written more by brush than pen. If the reed in certain lists meant a softened rush-acting brush-like, or if regional workshops favored different tips depending on fashion and papyrus polish. Your knight doesn't need a verdict. You make both futures possible by cutting one nib softer, more brushish, to float on the grain when it wants to sing. You set a modest row of tools like a parade of well-behaved ducks: knife, whetstone, sponge, extra reeds, a sliver of pumice, a scrap of linen for blotting, and the water cup you'll keep changing before it sulks into mud. The supervisor passes behind you and glances down. His eyes say what praise would only ruin. Good. You return the shard to its waiting pile, pick another, and mark 2 practice columns of signs, the reed exploring corners, curls, stops. You try a red ink flick, too, ochre bright as a sunset folded into clay, and the palette catches its breath as if pleased to be fully awake. The water clock gossips in drops. You align a second read by sound alone, a ridiculous skill that somehow works. Carve on the offbeat, pere on the downbeat, test on the pause. You know from the long memory of benches that a pen cut calmly outlives a pen cut fast, just as a wick trimmed short smokes less than a wick bullied into behaving. You think of the donkey exhale from the alley and try to infuse exactly that energy into the next slice. The shaving falls with the charisma of a yawn. Across from you, the younger scribe adjusts his grip and slices too boldly. His nib splinters. Nobody scolds. You pass him your pumice and he grins, gratitude folded small, and works the roughness away. You demonstrate the thumb roll, how a tiny rotation turns the chisel edge into a new voice without ever lifting the pen. He practices on his ostrakon, writing the same sign a dozen times, each one less stiff. Second joke. You offer to invoice him for the mini-lesson at the generous friends and benches rate, 1 raisin and half a fig. You refresh the water cup, no ink clots allowed, and set it down in the shadow where your elbow won't baptize the papers by accident. The sponge gets a gentle squeeze. You like the way it remembers its shape without drama, like a competent aunt. A moth decides your palette is a moon and attempts a landing. You shade it away with 2 fingers and it veers toward the window, perhaps to file a complaint about false advertising. Mainstream fact joins the edge of your vision. The standard palette has 2 primary wells, black and red, and often an extra slot for a spare nib or 2. Some are wood, some ivory or bone for the fancy set, but the working heart is the same. A strip long enough to hold the tools of a tiny universe. You turn yours and read the shallow grooves where other reeds rested. You've inherited a lane in a road too narrow to be anything but careful. A reed can do 100 things if the cut is honest. You test the slow draw for tall signs, the quick flicks for birds and snakes, the decisive downstroke that anchors a number where it belongs. The ostrakon receives these small rehearsals like a tolerant teacher. You draw a boundary line and realize you've unconsciously ruled a little riverbank, habit from the Nile. So you let a miniature heron step along it, just for the private smile of it. You blot the tiny bird with the linen, and it becomes a ghost heron. Calmer still. Historians still argue whether reed species changed the character of hand styles, whether Orondo-Donax bred bolder strokes than Juncus or Phragmites, or whether training simply overruled botany. You like imagining the marshes debating the matter themselves. Your fibers fray too eagerly. Your nodes are insufferably smug. You press the soft-nibbed reed to the sponge again, and it forgives every slander. Your knife, faithful and mild, earns a moment of care. You draw it along the whetstone at an angle that turns scraping into whispering, then wipe the blade on the linen scrap that already carries a family tree of ink freckles. The tool sings the simplest song. We're ready. You tuck it next to the palette, point turned slightly inward, a superstition about not pointing blades at words. Quirky tidbit, 2 in 1. Some scribes keep a sliver of beeswax to rub over a misbehaving nib. Others stroke it along their hairline for a ghost of oil. You consider the beeswax, skip the hairline. Your curls don't need a promotion, and return to the soothing tyranny of neatness. A second test on the shard. You write the opening phrase you know you'll copy later, just to feel its balance in your hand. The letters behave. The red chases them with the quiet cheer of headings announcing themselves without fuss. Somewhere behind you, the frog charm bumps its string in a slow, approving nod. The supervisor ties off a bundle with palm fiber, and the knot clicks home like a punctuation mark you could nap on. The room is awake without haste now. You trade your practice shard for a fresh one and write 3 tidy lines. Pen counts, spare nibs, sponge refreshed. It is an inventory disguised as poetry, or maybe poetry disguised as an inventory. You lay the reed you'll use first across the palette's spine and set the backups parallel. The water cup sits left of your wrist, the sponge slightly forward, the linen blot folded into a little sleeping blanket. You straighten one corner of the palette that wasn't crooked just to give your future self the gift of pretending it helped. You remember the ostracon from earlier with the donkey archivist and consider adding a colleague in the background, a mouse with an abacus, but mercy restrains you. Besides, the abacus hasn't RSVP'd to history here. You leave a tiny dot where the mouse might stand, a private joke for Dawn you. Third joke, if Dawn you files a complaint, you will process it within 1 to 2 eternities. The water clock drops again. The elder marks another notch, and time puts its hand on your shoulder with the warm pressure of friendly guidance. You angle the bench lamp so the shadow of your hand will fall away from the papyrus when it arrives. You check the slit once more. It opens and closes like a heartbeat. And the reed, pleased with itself, rests in your fingers at that perfect weight where tool becomes posture, and posture becomes breath. Everything that could squeak has been invited to purr. Your kit is proof against chaos, knife sharp, nibs cut, sponge polite, water fresh, palate calm. Outside, the alley remembers your sandals, but they're going nowhere. Inside, your hands remember the marsh, but they're staying here. You tap the bench with a quiet knuckle, knock for luck, and look to the supervisor, who nods toward the stack that will become tonight's river of words. Your pen hovers above the emptiness like a heron above a mirrored bank, then lowers, ready to leave the lightest possible wake. You reach for the small box of color, really a family of quiet stones, and slide it open so the night can put its nose in and approve. Inside are the dried ink cakes, black that looks like a thumbprint became a pebble, and red that resembles the inside of a baked brick, both waiting for water the way a shore waits for tide. Your palate tilts toward them with the eager courtesy of a host who's already set out cups. You settle the strip of wood on the bench, black well nearer to your dominant hand, red a little farther back where your sleeve can't graze it by accident. The frog charm nods once, as if to confirm the seating chart. You begin with black because most work prefers to arrive in a dark, calm voice. Mainstream fact: Egyptian black ink is carbon-based. Lamp black, that patient soot that rises from oil or fat lamps, bound with acacia gum and thinned with water. It's wonderfully stable. Carbon doesn't rust or bite papyrus fibers the way later iron gall inks will in other centuries. You drip a thumb's worth of clean water into the well and watch the surface tension dome like a tiny lens. The dried cake drinks slowly, softening at the edges. You coax it with the reed's flat back, then switch to the little pestle, a bit of limestone worn as round as a well-loved worry bead. The grinding begins, a velvety hush like a moth deciding to change its mind. The smell is faint smoke and something sweet from the gum, acacia with a memory of blossoms. You take your time. Ink isn't just made, it's asked. You draw circles smaller than coins, then smaller than seeds, until the paste loses its grit and the surface gleams like river rock. First joke. You consider naming tonight's batch Vintage Lamp, Late Evening, Notes of Patient Soot, but the label would take more ink than the well holds. You lift the pestle and let a thin thread slide off the reed's flank. The bead rounds, doesn't run, and sits with good posture. That's what you want. Compliant, but not watery. Glossy, but not arrogant. Now, the red. You tap a new bead of water into the second well and place the ochre cake in its bath. Quirky tidbit. Some red came from hematite, iron oxide ground very fine, so that the dust can stain everything it touches. Even your thoughts feel slightly ruddy if you let them. You grind the cake, and the sound is marginally brighter than black. If black is velvet, red is suede. You know what the red will do. Rubricate headings, mark totals, signal divine names or dangerous ones. There's a tradition of writing names like the snake Apophis in red, both to name and to contain. The well deepens in color until it looks like a tiny sunset found a way to sit down. Historians still argue whether most scribes mixed their own inks nightly from cakes supplied by specialized workshops, or whether some offices kept a standing jar of pre-mixed gloss guarded like a kitchen's sourdough starter, fed and tended by whoever drew the short reed. Either way, tonight the responsibility is yours, and the jars on the shelf trust your wrists. You add the tiniest pinch of gum from a lump wrapped in linen, the way a cook adds salt with a philosophy. The gum melts obligingly, taking your side in all future arguments about flow. You test both inks on an ostracon. First, the black, a slow downstroke, a leftward flick, a hairline that returns to thickness as though nothing happened. Then the red. A neat rubric point above the line, a soft underscore under a space where a heading will later live. The shine fades to a satin that loves the shard. You angle the lamp, and the ink returns the favor by not pretending to be glossy for longer than it is. Second joke. You congratulate the ink on its healthy boundaries, shiny when appropriate, matte when it's time to be an adult. You glance along the benches. Everyone has a tiny ocean going, small tides of water, little reefs of pigment, gum islands. Your own palette becomes a coastline map. You set your sponge in port position, front left, your water cup starboard, a sailor's joke no sailor asked for, and your blotting linen folded to a triangle because triangles behave. The reed you cut softer earlier naps across the palette's spine. The bold chisel waits on the near rim. You rotate the palette a breath to the right so your hand shadow will fall away from the text when you write, and the lamp agrees with this geometry. You keep a spare water cup nearby because black and red do not share well. Mainstream fact revisited. Egyptian palettes often have just the two wells, one for black, one for red. Nothing ruins a night like discovering your headings are at half strength because your black seeped over like an ambitious river. You police the border with the reed's dull end, scraping pigment that wandered home again. Your sleeve stays cuffed. Your elbow remembers kindness. Your wrist learns the precise arc that clears the wells like a hoop over a cat. You lift the gum lump and feel its tack soften your fingertips. It's tree sap humility, this binder. The reason ink behaves as more than soot mixed with wishful thinking. You warm the lump with a breath. Quirky tidbit 2. Some scribes swear that a drop of wine wakes red ink faster than water. Others claim wine makes it mischievous. You leave the wine to the offerings and give the well another patient circle. The paste obliges by going from rust to rose to the exact ceremonial red that can tell a line to stand up straight without raising its voice. In the corner, the water clock murmurs its approval. You've used 2 marks worth of time, which is precisely what a good batch needs. You set the pestle aside and rinse its nose in the spare cup, then dab it dry on the blotting linen where an entire constellation of past rinses shows in dusty halos. The frog charm swings once more, content to be the room's smallest supervisor. Historians still argue whether red ink usage followed strict temple protocols across dynasties. Were all divine epithets rubricated, or only some? And whether specific offices allowed playful rubric marks in letters the way a baker might add a flourish to a receipt. Your own experience suggests that tone has as much to do with the supervisor as the century. Tonight, the man at the door likes neat headings, clear totals, and red used like a well-placed eyebrow. You tap the reed into black and watch the slit sip. The first strokes on papyrus will be the true test. Ostraca forgive everything. You guide a dribble back into the well's belly and then revisit red for a whisper of a dot. Practice punctuation, just to feel the switch. Third joke. You tell yourself you're cross-training, as if your inks plan to run a modest marathon along the margins. Before you leave the mixing, you offer a courtesy to tomorrow. You scrape the well walls down so no dried ridges form little cliffs for later water to attack. You add a sliver of wax to the reed case so a future nib can be tamed with a polite polish. You check the lamp again. Wick a hair shorter, flame a shade shorter still, and set the palette where your hand will find it without the drama of searching. Everything should be grab without looking. The night supports memory only for those who give it less to remember. A donkey coughs a soft punctuation from the alley like an editor clearing his throat. Outside, a breeze threads the window and carries in a hint of river and a rumor of date palms. You rotate the palette a final time to follow the lamp's new angle. Shadow is the enemy of tidy, but it is also a friend if you choreograph it. The red well's surface moves like a sleeping eye. The black well doesn't bother with metaphors. Both are ready. You lay the reed over the palette and feel the balance. Pigment to the left, water to the right. Gum above, blot below. It is a compass only you can read. Your fingers test the nib's weight, and the tool says in its small wooden language that it can hold a sentence without spilling. You nod, take in a breath that smells faintly of soot and sweetness, and let the night tighten its weave around the bench. The palette becomes an orchestra pit. The page will be a stage. Your wrist the conductor no audience sees. Everything is quiet enough that a droplet at the water clock sounds like applause from a polite and very small crowd. You do not hurry. Haste is a daytime sport. You make one more lazy circle in the black, one more in the red, and then smooth the reed across the linen's clean edge. The palette sits composed, wells glossy, edges tidy, ready to behave for hours without complaint. You set your hand above it and feel the warmth of the lamp on your knuckles, the cool of the bench against your forearms, the invisible patience of the frog on its thread, and the memory of the donkey's sigh folded somewhere between your ribs. When you finally reach for the papyrus that waits beyond, you know you will bring the night with you line by calm line, black humming, red whispering, neither shouting, both content to be the colors of sleep. You reach for the roll waiting on the shelf, feel its cool cylinder, and lay it gently on the bench like a sleeping cat you absolutely do not wish to wake. The papyrus is smooth where it was polished and faintly toothy where it wants to remind you it used to be a plant with opinions. You ease back the first turn, and the fibers glimmer in lamplight. Horizontal strands on this face, cross-laid by a vertical underlayer. Recto over verso, like two hands woven for steadiness. Mainstream fact. Egyptians typically write on the recto first, the side with horizontal fibers on top. The nib glides better there, and the strokes keep their dignity. You run a fingertip along the grain and it hums silently under the skin, a river taught to become a road. The sheets that make the roll are joined together edge to edge. You can just make out a seam where one ends and another begins, the fibers overlapped with paste so polite you barely see the marriage. You imagine the workshop that made this. Pith sliced into ribbons, laid crosswise, pressed under weight, then burnished with a smooth stone until it learned to be polite under ink. The joins happen in the direction the roll will unspool, so your pen never trips over a ridge you didn't schedule. A donkey brays far off as if to second the motion. Your bench translates, proceed. You unroll enough for the first several columns and set a clay weight on the curling end. A small sun-baked disc with a hole for string. Quirky tidbit. Some weights are repurposed sherds with doodles on them. Little fish, a cat's face, a smile put there by someone who knew the night needed allies. Yours shows a stick boat. You approve the nautical theme for a river of text. The frog charm nods its steady approval, and the water clock whispers a drop that says, "Line soon." Layout is the art that keeps ink from becoming gossip. You pace your eyes along the emptiness and measure with your hand. A generous outer margin, so the roll has something to hold on to. A narrower inner margin, so the red headings can perch without panic. Columns wide enough for hieratic to breathe, but narrow enough to keep the eyes from wandering off to invent their own errands. You take a thin reed, the ruling reed, and dip it in nearly water-thin black, then blot it to whisper strength. Alternatively, you score with a bone-smooth burnisher so faint that only you and the lamp can see the glimmer of lines. Historians still argue whether most guidelines were incised dry, snapped with a tinted string, or put in with diluted pigment that faded into the fibers as the years went soft. You pick the method your wrist trusts tonight, the gentlest scoring, like drawing a breeze. You rest a straight edge, nothing fancy, just a slim plank planed true, on the papyrus and draw your baselines, left to right, then move the board down like a ruler playing hopscotch. A moth pauses at the red well to read over your shoulder. You thank it for its editorial contributions and suggest a sabbatical by the window. First joke, you offer the moth a junior copyist position. It declines on account of being very easily distracted by light, which is disqualifying but relatable. The first column marks itself by absence. You leave extra space for the red opening line that will announce the document's purpose. What? For whom? Which day of which month of which season? You keep the intercolumn gap regular as heartbeat. If your columns were people, they would be polite neighbors who know when to share figs and when to mind their own amphorae. The lamplight makes warm puddles on the pale surface. You turn the roll slightly so the shine doesn't pretend to be wetness and trick you into hesitating. You chart the vertical edges with tiny pricks of ink, then join them with faint lines so your paragraphs won't play favorites with gravity. The reed nib you cut softer earlier takes on ruling duty like a musician switching to a quieter instrument for the prelude. The room notices only insofar as its quiet feels more organized. From the door, the supervisor glances up, sees your measured columns, and goes back to tying a bundle as if he'd set the universe to neat earlier, and is now enjoying the dividends. The papyrus's seams pass under your hand at sensible intervals, the way long breaths pass under the tongue. At each join, you test with a light tap. Sound tells you if the paste is still proud of its job. It is. You lay a fingertips width at top and bottom for head and foot. Future, you will bless this when the roll needs tying or the text asks for an afterthought. High above, the gecko ticks its metronome twice. The water clock answers. Patience, patience. Mainstream fact tucks itself under your elbow. Standard rolls were assembled from multiple sheets, sometimes 20 or more, each made to a consistent height. They became the libraries of their day, catalogued, sealed, and shelved. Tonight's height suits a calm line spacing. You can write without appearing breathless. Your reed tests the path like a careful walker testing flagstones. You draw a sample heading in red, small enough to whisper, bold enough to guide, and it sits on the line with the posture of a well-brought-up guest. A small pile of offcuts, thin shavings from earlier, waits like confetti that knows it's actually useful. Quirky tidbit, too. Weavers sometimes braided papyrus for sandals and mats. You briefly imagine slipping off your sandals to press your toes into a mat of letters. Then remember that would be a prank the papyrus would not forgive. Second joke. You promise your feet a promotion to reader instead. You brush the offcuts into a bowl. The later bowl, home of things future you loves that present you cannot handle. And rotate the roll another handspan. You mark discrete cues for where black will carry the main current and where red will drop stones for stepping. Dates, totals, divine names, warnings, headings. The system isn't flamboyant, it's choreography. Your reed hovers over the empty lanes like a ferry poised between two banks, and you can already feel the pull of sentence barges moving along, cargo snug, pilots yawning. You set tiny tick marks where the rubric points will land, a dotted ceiling for little red stars that keep eyes from wandering. The bench has learned your weight. The fibers have learned your hand. The lamp has learned which direction to lean. You pause to rest your wrists. The papyrus smells faintly green still, as if somewhere in there the marsh refuses to believe in offices. The frog charm swings and returns to stillness in a single elegant compromise. You breathe and imagine the roll fully written, tied with palm fiber, sealed with clay, labeled on the outside with a neat line in black. The scribe's equivalent of a smile that says, "I know where this lives." Historians still argue whether scrolls for administration were typically laid out by a dedicated hand before copying began. One person ruling and margining, another writing, or whether each scribe handled their own stage setting. Your supervisor prefers the latter. It keeps responsibility snug. You agree because you like how your columns already feel like sentences you haven't said yet, but will say, well. Your elbow wants to be dramatic, so you give it a chore. Hold the straight edge. It calms down immediately, a toddler handed a dignified spoon. You draw the last guideline of the visible section, then test the roll's curl with the clay weight. Secure enough that it won't spring and smudge, loose enough that you can advance it without a wrestling match. Third joke. You consider entering the sport of competitive scroll management, but the awards ceremony would be too loud for your brand. The palette waits in peripheral vision. Black, serene, red, patient. The sponge at perfect damp is your small cloud. You decide on column count for this document. Better to match the length of the text bundle than overpromise. Then place a discrete sign in the margin you'll understand later. A tiny boat for copy text, a grain stalk for tally, a little square for petition. Not full drawings, just hints, your own shorthand folklore. You press each lightly so it won't upstage the main act. You lift the pen, hover and feel the difference between blank and ready. Ready is not simply empty. It's an emptiness with guidelines, a kindness with an address. The papyrus glows tenderly in the lamp's shallow dome. The water clock breathes its measured syllables. The frog gives the dignified nod only frogs can give. The donkey outside, perhaps dreaming of archivist promotions, exhales like a closing quotation mark. Your columns are straight but not stern. Your margins generous but not wasteful. Your rubric cues friendly but not fussy. You have drawn the lanes for a very quiet parade. All that remains is to invite the letters to stroll. You take one last sweep with your eyes to memorize the geography. Seams here and here. The slight waviness there that will want a slower hand. The grain that pulls a whisper to the left and thus must be courted to the right. You flex your fingers. The reed warms to your skin. The roll waits, not demanding, simply available, the way the Nile waits for boats that trust it. You lean in, find the first baseline with your breath, and set the point where the black will begin to sound like the night thinking in order. You lower the lamp's flame with 2 wetted fingers, and the tiny thread of fire obliges, shrinking to a bead that glows like a seed about to think optimistic thoughts. You've learned the wick's language. Pinch, don't scold. Trim, don't tug. A short wick smokes less, breathes better, and spares the papyrus a fine gray veil it never asked to wear. Mainstream fact. Egyptian lamps are simple dishes, or small nozzled cups fed with castor oil or animal fat. Their wicks twisted from linen or plant fibers. Trim them right, and the flame keeps its composure for hours. You work down the bench, touching each lamp with the same small ceremony. Shorten here, rotate there, add a thumb of fresh oil, until the room stops complaining in smoke and starts purring in light. The breeze you invited earlier loiters at the window, polite as a neighbor who knows not to bring loud figs after sunset. You nudge the shutter to a friendlier angle and tilt a reed mat screen so it can sieve the river air into soft lanes. Quirky tidbit. Some households dampen reed mats or hang wet linen strips to coax a cooler current from hot air. All it costs is a jug and patience, both of which you have in the petty cash drawer of night. The door to the courtyard stays open an obedient handspan. Beyond it, moonlit bricks cool themselves and the gecko on the lintel clicks like a tiny metronome who will not take requests. You angle your lamp so the shadow of your wrist will miss the papyrus by a breath. The flame agrees and puts its halo exactly where the nib will need it. Smoke leans toward the window, decides not to lodge a complaint, and exits with the dignity of a clerk leaving precisely at closing time. First joke. You consider bottling the resulting air as open window number 6. Notes of river. Subtext of please keep writing, mildly judgmental toward moths. The moth editorial board shows up anyway, tick-tick at the rim of light, then wobbles out to the courtyard to pursue its lifelong thesis in luminology. Noise sorts itself into layers. Closest, the whisper of wick trims, the kiss of sponge to nib, the creak-soft sound of papyrus uncoiling another careful handspan under the clay weight. Farther, the water clock's patient syllables, and the faint tremolo of jars settling as night air cools their bellies. Farthest, sandals on packed earth beyond the door, a watchman's staff trading one hip for the other, the donkey from earlier practicing deep, restorative silence between exhalations. You smile, remembering the limited edition Donkey Exhale fragrance you vowed to sell. Tonight it returns for an encore, all bass notes and forgiving realism. The lamps themselves seem to breathe. A well-placed saucer throws its light sideways, making your columns stand up straighter. You curtsy to physics and slide a burnished shard behind one lamp as a makeshift reflector. The light doubles on the page without doubling the smoke. Historians still argue whether official scriptoriums favored any standardized lampstand or reflector design, or simply adopted the domestic saucer and stand approach that worked for everyone else. Your bench votes for whatever doesn't fall over during a yawn, and the shard keeps its balance like a small, smug moon. A fan leans in the corner, palm-ribbed, broad, with a history of being useful. You take it up and smooth the woven leaves with your palm until the ribs remember they are co-workers and not drama. You give the room 3 slow sweeps, not enough to upset a flame, just enough to nudge smoke toward manners. Mainstream fact addendum. Fans matter in Egypt. Fan bearer on the right side of the king is an actual court title, half shade, half ceremony. Tonight, you hold no title beyond person who wants to see, which is nobility enough. Second joke, you post an imaginary job listing. Fan bearer night shift. Benefits include rosy forearms, smug breeze authority, and flexible gecko adjacency. Back at your bench, the flame's blue foot is small and calm, the good sign. You turn the wick with a pin, so carbon won't build a tiny tower that dooms the next paragraph to shadow. The lamp tastes of castor oil in the air. You accept it the way you accept a cousin who tells the same story at dinner, but brings good bread. You test the airflow with your cheek. Lamplighter's trick. And the air answers coolly, a slow ribbon across your skin, not a gust. Gusts are for boats and bad ideas. Script is for currents you can fold into your sleeve. The room's soundtrack gets very domestic now. Someone clears a throat in a volume labeled "I'm fine," and the sound dissolves before it can make a point. A reed squeaks because a nib's slit forgot to accept its tiny share of water. A quick sponge kiss, and the complaint retires. You brush a single grain of plaster off the papyrus. The wall is aging lightly, the way walls do, and the grain rattles in the quiet like a bead in a child's hand. This is not silence as in nothing. This is silence as in everything agrees. You light a stick of Kyphi in a shallow burner and set it far from the papyrus so it can lay a patient ribbon of honey wine cinnamon into the air. You tell yourself it keeps insects at bay. Mostly, it tells your nerves which direction to walk. Historians still argue whether the famous perfume cones shown atop wigs were real waxy perfumes used in evenings like this, melting fragrance in slow drips, or an artistic shorthand for smell nice, be nice. You picture a cone trying to survive in this heat and decide the debate can keep itself awake. Your room smells plenty like gentle library already. By the window, the reed screen twitches. The river has sent a cooler thought upstairs. You let it bend the lamp smoke a degree toward the door. Watch the flame accept the change without tantrum, and look at your columns to confirm the shadows remain suggestions, not lectures. The frog charm swings once, an amphibian eye. You take up the fan again, but only to lean it at the doorway so it can argue softly with the breeze and keep it organized into lanes. Mainstream fact returns for a bow. Temple spaces sometimes used clear-story windows, high slits that carry light and air down into deep rooms. If you've ever stood in Karnak, you've felt that slow-motion river of brightness. While your scribe room is humbler, the idea is kin. Air above, work below, the two talking through wooden slats and patience. You draft the breeze across your face again, and it speaks lamp, page, in the prettiest mutter. The water clock announces another measure. The elder marks the line, and the room adjusts its shoulders just slightly, as if we all share one large, quiet body. Third joke. The clock has the tone of a supervisor who only says, "How's it coming?" when things are going well. You decide to give it a raise in the form of a cleaner bowl. You top the lamp oil by a finger's width, never to the brim, because excitement makes fire show-off and you did not invite show-offs tonight. A fringe whisper from memory asks about insects. You check the corners. Spiders do their civic duty in sensible webs. Geckos patrol. Moths continue their luminous PhD. You once heard an elder swear by a thin ring of natron sprinkled on the floor to discourage ants. Plausible, practical, and invisible underfoot. Another swore a strip of mint on a windowsill told mosquitoes to mind their own business. You place a leaf there now, not as science, but as a respectful nod to grandmothers. The mint will keep your water cup honest at least. Quirky tidbit bonus. Some scribes tuck a sprig of fresh green under the lamp base to remind them to blink. Green breaks up smoke's fascination with your eyes. The room breathes around you. The lamps hum like cooperative suns. The papyrus waits like a well-drained field, and the breeze combs the heat into manageable waves. Historians still argue whether night work was routine policy in busy offices or a flexible solution during flood seasons and festivals. Your wrists vote thank you either way. The donkey in the alley decides to contribute a sigh. You nod back like colleagues who respect each other's professional portfolios. You look down at the steady flame and see your own night reflected in the oil. Dark, rimmed with gold, tremoring only when you do. You adjust the wick one last time so that reflection sits still. The impersonation of confidence helps the hands behave. The fan at the door whispers with the breeze. The reed screen tells the moths, "Not tonight, scholars." The water clock composes a lullaby in droplets. The gecko signs off on the minutes. Everything that clicks, glows, stirs, or exhales has agreed to become a single, long hush. You take a quiet breath and let it slide across your teeth like a warm spoon. The lamp brightens by a nuance and then holds. The room is now exactly the kind of nest a sentence gathers itself in. You rest your wrist where the shadow is kind, you slide your reed through the soft black, and you listen one more time to make sure the night will carry the tiny noises of writing the way a river carries leaves. Slow, unlost, with secrets turning over each other and deciding not to spill. The supervisor's voice arrives in the room like a low lamp, steady, warm, and not interested in being dramatic. He unties a palm fiber cord, smooths a sheet from the bundle, and reads a phrase that tastes of grain and river. For the granary of the western fields, measure such and such baskets in the 2nd month of Shemu. He pauses exactly the length of a water clock drop, giving you time to catch the cadence, the way a ferry gives you one extra heartbeat to step aboard. You repeat the phrase under your breath, quiet enough for the moth editorial board not to file a complaint, and your nib, dipped in black, accepts the first stroke like a heron foot testing silt. Hieratic unfurls the way reeds do when the wind has been polite, a quick knit of bends and angles, then a soft return to the line. Mainstream fact. Hieratic is the cursive twin of hieroglyphic script, used for everyday administration and literature, faster to write, with signs simplified and joined, and a rhythm made for wrists that must keep up with grain, temple offerings, and letters home. You let your hand find its corridor, downstroke, curve, hook, small tail, and the column becomes a current you can navigate without looking up. Eyes sliding from exemplar to papyrus, ear still tuned to the supervisor's next handful of words. He dictates in manageable bricks. Phrases are how you build a wall that will stay upright even when the night gets drowsy. Names of witnesses, he adds, softer, Q for read later, and you slip a tiny rubric dot into the margin, a lighthouse for tomorrow's headings. Speed tries to make promises. Accuracy gives you the better ones. You pick the latter. First joke. You pledge to write at tortoise with ambition pace. Faster than a pyramid grows, slower than a gossip runs. The room arranges itself around the sound. The elder at the water clock marks another notch. A younger scribe 2 benches over copies from an exemplar instead of dictation. His eyes seesawing in a cautious lullaby from model to line, model to line. Historians still argue whether dictation was the default in temple offices, one voice guiding many hands, or if most copying leaned on exemplars, with dictation reserved for letters and lists when the speaker was the source. Tonight, you get a little of both. The supervisor's gentle river, and occasional glances at a previous register to keep your totals in the same family. You mark totals with numbers that know their jobs. You glide around names with that tiny inward smile scribes keep for words the gods might notice. Your reed warms to the rhythm, and you keep the slit in that perfect, almost closed kiss so ink flows without blots. When a seam in the papyrus approaches, you slow as if stepping from boat to bank. Lighten pressure, lift, land. The ink dries to a soft satin. Your blotting linen pats the shinier places with the affection of an aunt offering second helpings. A quirky tidbit peers from the margins. Sometimes apprentices practice by copying the satire of the trades, a cheerful, slightly smug school text that praises the scribe's life as gentler than bricklaying, fishing, or soldiering. You've memorized lines of it. You hear it now like a friendly heckler. Better write well, it jokes, or the brick mold will call your name. You grin and add an extra hairline to a number as if to show you are properly motivated. The frog charm approves with a dignified bob on its string. The supervisor reads the next slab. Measurements, a place name, a witness with a familiar patronymic. You know the formula. You also know when formula hides a little mischief. You pause with the nib poised and ask, repeat the father's name? He does, calm as a rock, smoothed by river time. You correct the stroke you nearly took and the line resumes with no scar. Second joke. Your pen tries to unionize for 15-minute fig breaks. You promise a raisin at the next water clock mark, and it returns to productivity. You keep red sleeping for now, tagging with quiet dots where headings and the occasional emphatic name will later sit up straight. The black flows for the body, the gravity of the page. Mainstream fact addendum. Red rubrication marks sections, divine names, totals, and sometimes warnings. The 2-ink system is clarity made visible. Your palette, pleased by being used appropriately, glows like a small, smug shore. The supervisor lowers his voice another shade for a personal letter embedded in the bundle. Someone requesting transfer of rations to a relative. The tone changes. The formula softens. You mirror it on the page with a pace that breathes instead of marches. Historians still argue whether scribes added their own discreet polish, choosing a kinder phrasing, spacing lines to feel less cramped, or kept to strict verbatim copying even when a letter stumbled over itself. You thread the needle, fidelity with a coat of neatness, because neatness is mercy for future eyes. You check the papyrus edge, Advance the roll a handspan. Lower the clay weight like a quiet moon into a new sky. The donkey outside exhales a baritone parenthesis. You write through it. A competent duet. Reed sings, donkey hums. You copy a sequence of place names and pause to admire the geography hiding in the strokes. Desert edges, canals, little islands that only exist this way when the night is gentle enough to hold them. You spell carefully. A misplaced curl is a new town and a very confused courier. On the bench across the aisle, the younger scribe whispers his line endings to himself. His rhythm is learning how to fold. You tip one of your spare reeds toward him. Try a shallower angle on the next sign, and he nods without looking up. Gratitude folded inside concentration. He trims his wick. The room's light leans a degree friendlier, your column bathing in just enough gold to persuade your eyeballs that life is manageable. You come to a place where the exemplar's ink thinned, perhaps a hurried hand, perhaps a dry well, and your own line would inherit that tiredness if you didn't intervene. You pause to re-ink and make a decision. Steadier here, not heavier. The reader who arrives years from now won't know where your wrist saved them from a misread, but they'll feel the ease. Third joke. Your future reader sends a thank you fruit basket across time. You accept on behalf of your wrist. Mainstream fact returns to hold the room upright. Copies often end with a colophon, a closing note that can name the scribe, the date, sometimes the place, sometimes a little prayer for accuracy, or the equivalent of copied from a good exemplar. You let the thought warm your shoulder. A good colophon is a bow and a receipt. Yes, a human did this, on a night that smelled like castor oil and patience. You reach a witness list and unspool the names with that half-reverent care given to things that will matter later. Red points mark each new person. You consider, briefly, the small lives clustering here. A boatman, a storehouse keeper, someone's cousin whose handwriting on the receipt you still remember, because it leaned like a palm in wind. The page becomes a room of their voices, subdued and precise. Hieratic holds them without flair, which is respectful. Not everyone wants a fresco. Some people just want their barley counted sanely. Historians still argue whether some ligatures, the way two signs fuse, signal dates or workshops. Handwriting scholars have favorite hills to nap on in that debate. You have your preferences, too. Your N likes to be a little more river than snake. Your R more hook than wing. You keep them consistent, because consistency is the lullaby a page sings to itself when nobody else can. The water clock murmurs another measure. You flex your fingers, press the reed's slit gently to encourage breath, and write the last word of this dictated section with an ending curl that lands like a boat's rope looping around a post. Your eye strolls back up the column to scan for crowding, wayward tails, shy dots. Nothing screams. Nothing even whispers rudely. You reward the page with a slow breath and your read with a minuscule haircut, so the next column begins with confidence, not nostalgia. The supervisor sets down his bundle and, after a pause polite enough to count as praise, says, "Read for the headings." You nod, collect the calm sunset in the second well, and let it draw quiet eyebrows over the sections that now deserve labels. The red dries with dignity, as if it always knew it was in charge of naming the rooms in this document's house. You return to black, and the night carries you. Voice to hand to line, line to column, column to scroll, as if nothing in the world is urgent except the soft agreement between a word and where it belongs. You pause at the end of the column and tilt the roll, letting the lamplight skate across the ink in a shallow gleam. Shiny tells you, do not touch. Satin tells you, proceed politely. A tiny sparkle near the base of a sign flirts with wetness, so you hover the blotting linen and kiss the place once. No more, lifting the extra shine the way you'd rescue a crumb from a friend's lip. The fabric comes away with a faint gray sigh, and the page relaxes, less movie star, more librarian. Mainstream fact. Egyptian scribes correct wet ink with blotting. Linen, sponge, or even a dab of dry papyrus, because carbon and gum is cooperative when it's still young. Once it sets, you negotiate with blades. You find a stray tail you didn't mean to draw, a half-breath too long on a curve, the kind of thing future readers forgive, but your bench does not. You dampen the point of the sponge, no more than morning dew, and touch only the mistake. The stroke lightens to ghost, and while it surrenders, you draw your knife from its place beside the palette. The blade is not angry, it's a whisperer. You scrape across the softened fibers, skimming, not digging, until black becomes gray, and gray becomes rumor. Then you turn the knife's back to burnish, pressing, smoothing, ironing the rumor back into never mind. First joke. You consider leaving a note for your future self. It never happened, love, the knife, but the papyrus prefers plausible deniability. Red waits like a well-behaved chorus for its cue. You dip, shake off an extra bead on the rim, and lift headings into their places. One for the witness list, one for the measurement unit, one for the polite said by the scribe, which is how pages sign their voice without shouting. Rubrics line up like patient eyebrows. Quirky tidbit. Some offices use 3 tiny red dots to nudge attention, a kind of ancient bullet list, while others prefer a thin red bar. Yours likes the small dots, each one a heartbeat over the line. They dry quickly, iron oxide being the tidy cousin in this family of colors. You lean closer and find a crowded knot where 2 signs are slow dancing in a space meant for one. The papyrus has opinions about personal space, and you respect them. You wet a hair's breadth of the linen and blot the left-hand sign to silence, then scrape it back, then burnish, then try again with a narrower nib. The second attempt slides in as if it always lived there. Historians still argue whether heavy correction was frowned upon in certain archives. Did too many scrapes send a page to the scrap pile? Or whether technique mattered more than count. A flawless correction winning a place on the shelf where a messy line would not. Your supervisor's shoulders tilt the way you like. Do it carefully, and the page will never tell. Against the right margin, you mark a soft aid for later. A faint dot every 5 lines. Your own metronome. So you won't wander into the afternoon by accident when your wrists are thinking about figs. No pencil exists in your century, but you make a pencil's ghost with diluted black, so faint that the lamp needs to gossip with the page before it's visible. You'll wash these away with a wet fingertip when you reach the end, and no one will know your quiet crutch ever stood there. Second joke. You label the dots in your head as encouragement crumbs, the trail for a scribe who might forget where they left their sentence while negotiating a yawn. You spot another candidate for mercy. A place name where the exemplar's ink faded just as the scribe had to choose between island and town. You drift the reed into black again, and strengthen the decisive curl that makes it one and not the other. The column sighs in relief. You angle the sheet, assess the grain where your knife burnished, and stroke it once with a bit of pumice to restore the smooth. The reed tests the patch. No snag, no sulk, and the repair disappears into the conversation of fibers as if it had always been fluent. On a nearby shelf, the ostraca you practiced on earlier offer their own education. One shard shows a mouse riding a cat like a parade horse. Another, a donkey with a very important scroll between its teeth. The office jokester's calling cards. You allow yourself a micro-doodle at the bottom margin of your own column. So small it's almost a punctuation mark. A palm leaf no bigger than a fly's wing, pressed where the parchment seam meets the space beneath the last line. It's a wink to your future eyes, nothing a clerk would swat with a rule. Quirky tidbit addendum. Satirical ostraca from Deir el Medina really do show animals playing at bureaucracy. You suspect they corrected morale more than ink. You move back through the column with a reed held like a feather duster. Not to erase, just to reassure. You find a lonely dot missing from a number and place it, a single seed dropped into soil. You see a tail that leans too close to the neighbor below. You shave it with the knife as if trimming a hedge. The room congratulates you by staying quiet. Nothing is louder in a scriptorium than a botched rescue. Third joke. You whisper, "Good save," to your reed, and it tries to claim hazard pay. You offer an extra dip in the nicer well. Red returns for its second task. Corrections that need confessing. A wrong letter that looked right until it didn't gets a neat red circle. Your office's mark for, "We see this, we fixed this." You add the proper sign in black above, smaller, as if the word were balancing a thoughtful hat. Mainstream fact. Correction marks varied. Sometimes a line of red above, sometimes a dot beside, sometimes an erasure and rewrite so clean no mark remained. Your shop prefers honesty in miniature. Future readers should know where the page blushed and carried on. The water clock gives you a friendly syllable. You sip water of your own and let your eyelids do their tiny maintenance routine. The lamp's bead of flame holds steady. Your wick sits like a well-trained apprentice who knows when not to be noticed. You draw a faint guide in red for an impending total. Just a line to catch the eye later, and feel a switch flip in the page. The document now has rooms you can walk between without remembering the plan every time. Historians still argue whether rubric choices carry regional accents. Did Thebes prefer bars while Memphis used dots? Or whether individual supervisors left fingerprints you can still read across decades like handwriting in the margins of time. You unroll to the next seam, and the clay weight pats the curl back with its baked palm. A faint scratch from earlier work glints. You test it with your fingertip and decide to fill it with a breath of gum water, a scribe's spackle. When it dries, you burnish, and the scratch trades sharp for tame. Your reed glides across without noticing. You think, for a blink, about all the anonymous repairs that let pages look inevitable. Then you tuck the thought under the frog charm, which swings once in polite agreement. On a whim, you place 2 faint alignment dots out at the extreme margin where the red headings will later land. Your airplane landing lights. They will disappear under rubric, but for now they tether your eye. You whisper the next phrase from the exemplar, matching your breath to the syllables, and write it with a pace that suggests you've known how to do this for years, and are in no hurry to impress anyone about it. The moth editorial board reconvenes, bounces once off the read screen, and files a glowing review of your restraint. A smudge threatens near the base of the last line. Somewhere your wrist got friendly with a shine. You lay a thin strip of scrap papyrus as a guard, the way a pianist lays a handkerchief, and continue above it, smudge quarantined, dignity saved. When the strip lifts, the line underneath is unmarked, the papyrus grateful for the barrier you remembered to bring. You reward the page with a crisp red dot over the new heading, and the bench with a slow exhale you pretend not to enjoy as much as you do. You read back the last 5 lines in a murmur, the room's version of proofreading, and your ear catches what your eyes might have missed. A preposition tries to dress up as a noun, cheeky, and you undress it with a quick scrape and a truer line. The new stroke settles in like a bookmark finding its page. You dab a little water from the sponge onto the correction, burnish, and move on. One small lie traded for a slightly better truth, which is most of editing anywhere on Earth. By the time you reach the foot of the column, black and red have learned to share again, and the papyrus shines only where it should. Your guideline dots have done their silent work. You touch each with a damp fingertip, and they vanish. A magic trick nobody applauds because the applause is how easily the eye travels now. You cap your red with a breath over the well, not to dry it, just to bless it, and rest the reed across the palate's spine, its point angled away from temptation. The roll waits, obedient under the clay weight. The water clock leaks time kindly. The frog charm refuses to do anything but succeed at being a small, convinced frog. Your bench, your blade, your blot, and your 2 inks have conspired to make the column look like it grew here, not like you argued it into place. You smile, not wide. Wide smiles are for daytime. But in that inward sketch way people do when a line sits up straight and promises to cause no trouble at all. You slide the straight edge down one last time, whisper thanks to the fibers for forgiving your knife, and turn your ear toward the next phrase the supervisor will deliver, ready to write it, and ready, if needed, to erase it so well that even the night won't remember where the mistake tried to live. You glance up from the tidy column and let your eyes do what lamps can't, climb. Through the reed screen, the sky has finished its slow wardrobe change and now wears a dark linen sewn with small, convincing pins. The water clock to your left mutters its droplets with the confidence of someone who knows that enough plop, plop eventually becomes a paragraph. You stand, stretch the stiff curve from your shoulders, and go check both clocks, the one on the bench and the one dripping stars. The elder gives you his reed tally for the clepsydra, and you study the bowl's inner wall where hours are nicked like polite teeth. Mainstream fact: Egyptian water clocks, clepsydrae, often carry interior scales because hours change length across the year. Winter night hours are long, summer ones brief, so the calibrations shift by season. Yours is practical pottery rather than temple luxury stone, but the trick is the same. Water leaves, time arrives. You top it with a ladle's worth and watch the meniscus settle, the surface reflecting your lamp as a small sun doing overtime. Outside, the courtyard keeps the night honest. You lean on the door jamb and let your pupils adjust until stars snap into place. There are the deacons, star groups that take turns rising through the night like patient ushers. In older tables, 12 deacons pace out the hours, a slow parade of light that never hurries, even when you want it to finish your sentence. You find Sopdet, serious, low and loyal, the ancient herald of the Nile flood when it first rises before dawn. You mouth its old name like a charm, and feel the page behind you nod, the way paper seems to nod when a fact clicks into the right drawer. The breeze documents your face as cooled. You mark the water clock again, compare it to the sky's suggestion, and declare them within friendly arguing distance. Historians still argue whether decanal star lists, the diagonal tables painted on coffin lids and copied in temple books, were everyday tools for working night shifts like yours, or primarily sacred schedules for rituals whose audience included gods and insomnia. Either way, your wrists don't mind the pedigree. Hours are hours. Ink is ink. You bring the night back inside like a well-behaved cat and set it down near the lamp. The frog charm, demoted earlier to pure morale officer, gets a promotion, assistant timekeeper. It swings once, approving its own resume. First joke, you consider giving the water clock a ceremonial title too. Introvert hourglass, responsible for civilized plopping. But its union insists on anonymity. The clepsydra sings another droplet into the bowl. Your reed answers with a sentence that lands exactly between two deacons, as if the stars were the room's gentlest metronome. The civil calendar twines through your head while you write, 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 epigomenal extra days, birthday feast days, bureaucratic exceptions, editorial endnotes for the year. You love that structure because your files love that structure. A tidy calendar is just a scroll with aspirations. Your document dates itself obediently within Shemu, the harvest season. If the flood has been kind, granaries smile. If not, math holds the line while moods do what moods do. You note the month in a red whisper, the day in black, one running after the other like siblings divided by duty. A quirky tidbit pads over in sandals. Lucky day almanacs exist. Little hemorrhagies telling you which days welcome letters, which favor boat trips, which politely suggest you stay home and invent a new soup. Somewhere in your shelf sits a copy of such a calendar that says, with priestly deadpan, "Do not cross the river. It is the day of crocodiles being chatty." You glance at the doorway and imagine last week's crocodile dung sunscreen rumor. Remember, you've heard worse in markets, and decide tonight's advice is, stay at the bench. It is the night of finishing what you started. Back at the roll, you pencil, water ink, 2 micro ticks in the outer margin for the next 2 water clock marks. They're not for show. They're lane markers for your pace. You prefer tortoise with ambition to hare with regrets, and the page appreciates being the pond where the tortoise wins by default. Second joke, you try to train the donkey outside to bray every hour, but the pilot program devolves into donkey exhale at irregular intervals, which is somehow better. You step to the window and sight along a cheap astronomer's kit, a simple merket, a plumb-line sight, strung on a palm stick borrowed from the fan. With the cord steadied between stars, you line up north-south in your head, a trick temple astronomers use for aligning walls, but you use it for aligning mood. The city rotates under your invisible string. When you turn back to the bench, your columns feel straighter, as if the north you just borrowed has taken up residence along your margins. The elder grunts softly. The clepsydra needs its paperwork. You mark the slat, whisper the fraction, and refill with the patience of someone topping a plant they like too much to drown. Mainstream fact addendum. Some clocks are fancy lotus shapes with inscriptions of hours and months. Others, like yours, are do the job, do not brag. The job is simple. Divide the dark so that duties can find their chairs. Your duty returns to its chair with a little creak. Your reed points itself at the next blank like a compass needle that's finally had coffee. Your mind, meanwhile, holds the sky maps the way you hold grocery lists. Not all at once, but enough. Orion's foot, where he pretends to be a different myth here. Sirius near the horizon pretending to be carried in procession. The deacons rising by turns. Sa, Septet, Bacht, and then the shift into those faint risings that require imagination and excellent lamps for the soul. You don't need them all to steer this night. You just need the feeling that time is behaving, and both water and star agree to behave. You return a favor to future you by writing a minuscule red star, just a dot, next to the line you'll want to resume after the next clock check. It's the scribal equivalent of "Where was I?" that spares you the ritual of rereading when a moth distracts you with its dissertation on illumination. Historians still argue whether red star marks in margins on surviving texts are editorial, ritual, or purely practical. You cast your vote for practical tonight, ritual tomorrow morning when we pretend we meant symbolism. Another droplet. You pause, listen, and feel your pulse quietly try to match the bowl. It won't, precisely. Bodies are more enthusiastic than bowls. But the attempt slows your shoulders, which is the point. The lamp flame leans toward the window like a polite gossip. You rotate the saucer a finger width, and the shadow of your hand walks off the line it was about to scold. Third joke. You promise the shadow its own column if it behaves. It declines. Too shy. You jot a neat red heading for the next section. Just a sober eyebrow over the line, and feel the schedule lock. From here to the next deacon, you'll finish the witness names. After that, the totals. Then, before dawn, flirts with the palm tops, the colophon. You can smell dawn before you see it, an invisible damp that adds bass notes to the air. When that scent arrives, you'll be at the perfect sentence for stopping. Not mid-thought, but mid-comfort. The civil calendar, with all its proud regularity, drifts slowly against the true year, slipping a day every 4 or so. Historians still argue whether most offices shrugged and copied the date as written, while priests quietly recalibrated ritual to the sky, or whether there were housekeeping rituals, an unofficial leapish day that the paperwork simply didn't mention. You're content to write what the supervisor ties into your bundle. If Sopdet wants to run the real show, you let her, and you keep the ink honest on the page. Another check. The clepsydra plops. The deacon you'd expected has hauled itself up the eastern doorframe of the horizon. The gecko clicks the minutes twice. The donkey declines to comment. You blow softly across the red well to discourage bubbles, as if wells could get ideas, and watch the surface lie back down. You write 3 more lines, then 4, then stop exactly where your tiny red star proposed. The bench, very slightly, sighs. You finish the moment the way a good hour deserves finishing. A fingertip to the papyrus edge to test for curl, a glance to be sure your guidelines haven't staged a mutiny, and a nod at the frog. Assistant timekeeper has performed admirably. You repay the promotion with a repositioning closer to the water clock so it can swing to the bowl's faint breath. The frog approves this management decision with a leadership wobble you find deeply persuasive. The sky outside holds its note. The room inside holds its reply. You rest your reed across the palette. Let black settle and red think quiet thoughts, and make a mental promise to future you. When dawn arrives and the star called morning cuts the seam of the river, you will have the totals balanced, the headings tucked in, and the schedule obediently wrapped around a sentence that closes like a door with soft hinges. Time has been kind and measurable tonight, by bowl and by star, and your lines have walked calmly from one to the other, leaving small, tidy footprints that look suspiciously like letters. The bundle on your left wears a practical string like a belt, modest and a little proud. You untie it, smooth the top sheet, and meet the night's next chores. Receipts, petitions, and those small letters that carry entire families folded into 4 neat panels. The first item is a grain receipt. No poetry, just peace. You write the customary preface, steady as breath, and line up units like little jars. Mainstream fact. Grain here is reckoned in hecot and larger car. The hecot is a tidy volume measure, enough to make a loaf dream about itself, and the car is the big sibling that moves by boat, by tally, by the patience of men with shoulders. You write, received into the western granary, the day, the witness line already waiting like a chair pulled out for a guest. The numbers behave. Your reed marks the amount, then the source, canal side field, 3rd furrow from the sycamore. And you add the name of the messenger with a red dot before it, because people carrying grain deserve punctuation as much as barley does. You leave a space for the seal. Seals are the satisfying part. A dab of damp clay or mud folded over a cord. A quick press of a scarab ring to tattoo authority into waiting earth. You can already feel the scarabs carved intaglio. Lions, a cartouche, a tiny phrase. Bite the clay with that soft kiss that says, yes, this jar belongs to the archive now. Next, a petition. The tone shifts. You slow so the words don't get winded. To the scribe of the granary, it begins, regarding rations owed. The petitioners are polite but specific. Name against amount, amount against the last tally you copied 2 nights ago. Historians still argue whether most petitions like this were drafted by the complainants or spoken to a scribe who shaped the complaint into the right grammar and acceptable humility. You suspect both. Sometimes a man arrives with a phrase already warmed in his mouth. Sometimes he arrives with nothing but hands and hope, and the pen lends him a tone that will be heard. You give this one a clear spine. Dates crisp, numbers aligned, the respectful life, prosperity, health formula, bowing just enough to get through the door without scraping its head. You turn the sheet and docket the verso, a brief line that tells the future you what sleeps here without untying the roll. Quirky tidbit. Archivists love a good docket so much that the back of some papyri reads like a tiny street of signboards. Grain receipt, Shemu 2. Petition about baskets, man with the scar. Letter to mother, keep. Your docket is smaller, but it wears the same sensible shoes. You fold the petition along planned creases, 3 panels like a calm fan, then tie a palm fiber around the belly and press the seal ring so the knot stands inside a small moon of clay. The stamp you use tonight is the supervisor's, scarab with a running lion and a thread of signs that threaten to spell his name if squinted at. The clay takes it happily. First joke, you murmur, hold that pose to the lion, which obliges because it has been mid-sprint since the day it was carved, and, frankly, could use the validation. You blow across the seal, not to dry it. Clay doesn't listen to breath, but to congratulate it for choosing a tidy impression on the first try. The next sheet is homilier, a receipt for baskets and rope delivered to the granary gate. You write the counts and make a note of the smell, rush and tar, only in your head. You know which rope belongs to which maker just by the twist. Your wrist remembers. You add the witness and your little red eyebrow, then reach for the clay again. Mainstream fact addendum. Jar stoppers and papyrus ties alike receive sealings, and when those seals arrive broken, the story writes itself before the document is even unrolled. You set this one aside to dry, nose wrinkled at the tar in a friendly way. Tar smells like work that floats. Then the letter you've been waiting for pads into the queue like a cat pretending coincidence. It's personal. You hide it between an official receipt and a petition as if to Mother were simply another form. You pull a narrower sheet from the stack, something with a pleasant tooth, and you let your hand relax its posture a fraction. Life, prosperity, health to you, you begin. Ankh, Wedja, Seneb. From your son who writes by lamp and keeps his fingers clean. You report what letters always report. The river's level, the taste of beer, the hecat you're saving, the sandals that need mending, the rumor that the neighbor's goat has learned to undo knots. You promise figs soon, and make the joke you always make. Second joke. You tell her you are becoming a connoisseur of donkey exhale, which is the night's finest perfume. She will laugh, then copy the phrase into her next letter, as if it were her invention. You keep your voice light, but you tuck a real ask under the humor. If you see the basket maker with the careful twist, tell him the rope for the west gate must not sulk in rain this season. You know Mother will carry the message the way women carry half the city, quietly, then completely. Historians still argue whether women commonly wrote their own letters in villages like Deir el Medina, or dictated through relatives and friendly scribes. Surviving letters speak in so many tones that the answer keeps shifting under scholars' feet like river silt. You don't care which hand writes, you care which heart arrives. You fold the letter with the good creases, the ones that will remember to stay shut even when a courier gets thirsty. You tie it with a thread from your own kit, slip a tiny dab of mud over the knot, and reach for your personal ring. It isn't fancy. The beetle carved on its belly is more determined than elegant. The impression, though, is as binding as any lion's sprint. You press it, and feel the clay answer with a grainy little yes. You write Mother's name on the outside and add by way of the rope maker's cousin, because networks are maps written in invisible ink until a letter says them out loud. A last receipt waits, one with an attitude. The numbers wobble in the exemplar. Somebody did math with heat stroke. You steady the total, write the numerals clean, and add the witness who always brings his own pen because he thinks it writes handsomer. Your reed chooses not to be jealous. Third joke. You tell it the other pen is just a tourist. Your reed pretends not to preen, which is a kind of preening. You docket the verso, fold, tie, and press the scarab again. The string bites a neat groove into the clay. Later, when the seal is broken, that groove will testify that the knot once sat here like a small, confident king. Quirky tidbit returns. Recycled papyrus is a thing. You flip a spare sheet and see ghost lines of an old account barely visible, as if a previous night were whispering under yours. You turn the sheet a quarter, write across the ghosts, and the two nights agree to share. The back will get a docket that admits the palimpsest. You love how archives hate waste almost as much as they hate chaos. You set the official letters in a neat stack by destination. Up river by boat at dawn, across town by runner when the watch changes, inside the complex with the morning lamp. Your own letter goes beneath the rope receipt so it can hitchhike respectfully to the basket maker's quarter. You check each seal with a fingertip, a habit old scribes teach. Feel the clear edges, the unbroken string channels, the right dryness. Each passes. You brush away a grain of fallen clay, so it won't print itself onto the papyrus it naps against in the bundle. Mainstream fact, bows once more. Many letters carry the greeting formula: life, prosperity, health. often followed by little domestic weather reports, how the house stands, who sneezed, which offering tasted like triumph. The letters from workmen's villages can be frank, even sharp. Some are love notes disguised as errands, some are errands disguised as love notes. You lay your palm on your stack and feel a street of voices arrange itself under your skin. Grain talk, rope talk, home talk. Every one of them counting on clay to keep its mouth until the right hands arrive. You tie the bundle with palm fiber. The knot learns its job quickly. You file a docket on the outside read smooth. Receipts and letters, Shemu 2, West Granary. The frog charm approves from its post by the water clock. When the runner arrives in the gray ribbon before dawn, you'll give him this stack and watch his feet take your sentences to other shadows that will turn into mornings. For now, you sit back, blow once over the seals out of habit, and listen to the clay cool, the ink finish, and the night lift a corner of its blanket to check that everyone is asleep except the words that still want to walk. The bundle that belongs to the temple arrives with a different weight, not heavier in clay or fiber, but heavier in hush. You slide the palm cord free and lift the top sheet. The first lines are familiar as bread, a daily inventory for offerings, bread loaves, beer jars, meat cuts, bouquets of papyrus and lotus, incense cones smooth as small moons. Mainstream fact. Temples keep meticulous offering lists, specifying what each deity receives at each hour of ritual. Morning unsealing, midday sustenance, evening reversion of offerings. Your reed, newly wetted in black, sets these items into the column as if laying them on an altar. 1 loaf here, 2 jars there, a string of onions that somehow smells like home even when it's just ink. You copy the heading for the House of Amun, the morning rite, in red, a quiet sunrise on the page. The flame answers by pretending to brighten. You leave polite spaces where the names will stand, names that feel less like nouns and more like keys. The scribe beside you slows, too. Even moths trim their flight. You breathe through your nose so the ink stays brave. The hymn slips in next, tucked beneath the inventory like a ribbon under a seal. Wake in joy, Lord of Thrones, when the doors open to the east. You carry it across the lines in black that behaves like one continuous stroke, the handwriting version of a bow. You know the cadence even before your eyes finish it. The rhythms live in the walls. You don't sing. This is not the hall, but you let your breath imitate the melody. First joke. The frog charm bobs once as if conducting, which makes it the smallest choirmaster in Upper Egypt. There's a column of epithets to copy. Throne names, town names, beloved of, phrases that cascade with ceremonial grace. You keep them aligned, red ticks marking each shift in address like respectful nods in a long introduction. Mainstream fact addendum. When copyists write problematic or dangerous names, Apophis the serpent, for example, they often use red, not only as a heading color but as a mark of magic containment. You don't have that serpent tonight, but habit still makes your wrist hover a little longer over certain words, as if the fibers require gentler landing. A quirky tidbit offers itself from the edge of your memory. In some shrines, worshippers whisper petitions into hearing ear chapels, small architectural ears carved into walls, because gods, like lamp flames, listen better when the air is still. You glance at the door and imagine the courtyard's ear made of shadow, catching the murmurs of sandals and sending them along. You return to the page and copy the hymn's middle section. Open the face, unfurl the fragrance, sweeten the hour. The Kyphi from earlier makes this line feel literal. The script gains a faint perfume you'll never convince future readers you didn't imagine. The supervisor's voice thins to a respectful thread when he adds a rubric note. Speak this softly. Historians still argue whether scribes in workrooms pronounced epithets under their breath as they copied, or kept absolute silence outside formal ritual. Tonight, you let your lips shape the words without letting them escape. Your jaw knows the hymn, your ear stays economical. The reed, entirely secular, keeps its own vows by staying chisel-true through the curves that make speech into picture. You reach a set of offering quantities for festival days. The numbers swell like a procession turning a corner. More bread, more beer, more flowers, more smoke rising to negotiate with sky. You widen your spacing a hair to avoid crowding sacred appetite. The water clock offers a droplet, plop, and you answer with a neatly finished total. Second joke. You resist the temptation to add "and one extra loaf for the donkey," knowing the animal outside will accept the compliment telepathically. The roll advances. The clay weight lands like a calm priest setting a tray on a dais. You copy a line about purifications by natron, and the room briefly tastes of dry salt in your imagination. Quirky tidbit 2. Temple personnel, especially in inner rites, shave head to toe and bathe in natron solutions for ritual purity, an enthusiasm for smoothness that even your reed would respect. You wet the reed's slit with a kiss and grin at the accidental solidarity. Both of you practicing tiny purifications to keep lines true. The hymn stacks its metaphors like offering trays: bread for the mouth, incense for the nose, music for the ears, light for the eyes, cool water for the heart. You copy each in phrases that barely lift from the baseline, hand and breath braided. A red rubric appears, say 4 times, and you mark a neat tally in the margin, your own visual metronome. Historians still argue whether such tallies represent actual repetitions performed by the priest or simply indicate the structure of the hymn when sung by a choir. You like the notion that the page itself remembers how many breaths the song took last feast. The names arrive. They unpack themselves in long, beloved titles. You give them the spacing they deserve, a little temple within your column. You hesitate over one epithet. Does the model show Lord of the Thrones of the Two Lands, or Lord of Thrones and Two Lands? The smudge could be either, a gray democracy you do not appreciate. You walk to the shelf, pull a better exemplar, and compare. The elder joins, 2 heads angled like ibis birds consulting a pool. Consensus: of the two lands. You return, satisfied, grateful for the momentary committee. Third joke. You consider writing committee approved in minuscule demotic just to tease future scholars, but your brand is soothing, not mischievous. You shift to red for the ritual stage directions. Open doors, present bread, recite the verse. They step like soft sandals at the column's edge. Black keeps the theology in the middle. Red keeps the choreography at the periphery. Together they make an orderly dance. Your wrist has become a priest with ink. Your bench, a small hypostyle hall made of wood grain and habit. Mainstream fact returns with a bookish flourish. The funerary composition we call the Book of the Dead was known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, copied in hieratic as well as hieroglyphic, with rubric headings and vignettes guiding the dead through spells and declarations. I have not stolen, I have not lied. You are not copying that tonight, but the cadence is in your hand anyway. Sacred texts share a family rhythm. You tuck a line from a morning hymn into the offering register. A cross-reference the archive will thank you for when the festival overlaps with the civic calendar. The lamp starves a little. You pinch, trim, and re-oil with the discretion of a chamberlain. The flame recovers without coughing smoke onto the sacred words. The papyrus drinks the light like a pilgrim allowed to the basin. The gecko clicks from the lintel, which you decide is its version of Amen. You wet your sponge and kiss a smudge away from the name of a god, so the fibers can be smooth where they deserve to be smooth. The reed skates across the repair with the lightest satisfaction. Historians still argue whether temple text production primarily happened inside the House of Life complex attached to the temple precincts or among contractors, skilled copyists hired per scroll and paid in barley and favor. Your supervisor is a lifer, House of Life trained. His posture says institutional memory and steady meals. You, regardless of payroll, behave like the room belongs to the words and you are on loan. A sentence about reversion of offerings, the redistribution of temple food after the rite, arrives and reminds your stomach it is an organ with opinions. You add a clear total. The red dots applaud with quiet restraint. A breeze from the reed screen lifts the page's edge, and the clay weight presses it back down like a blessing. You write the final line of the inventory. May it be pure for thy Ka. And the column ends as neatly as a procession returning its standards to the store. You glance over what you've written. No crowded names, no slouching rubric, no careless tales. The hymn has air, the offerings have dignity, the directions have calm. You add a discreet colophon in microscript, copied in Goodyear by steady hand, because a sacred page deserves an honest closing. You don't sign your personal name. The text is the important person in the room. Still, the way your reed pauses above the last dot says you are there. The way a sandal print says someone crossed a threshold without needing to be saluted for it. Outside, the courtyard offers a sip of cooler air. The donkey executes a textbook exhale, deep, generous, strangely authoritative, which the gods, being practical, surely recognize as a sincere offering of breath. You smile without teeth, lay the red over black across the palette to rest, and lift the temple bundle's next sheet. The frog charm swings once, as if to say that sacred words and accounting share the same river, and you nod back, already hearing the first syllable of the next hymn assemble itself in your mouth like a small, luminous boat. The next bundle smells faintly of dust that remembers sunlight. You untie the cord, and a log sheet greets you with that particular seriousness stones command from people who mostly write about grain. Headings first, red eyebrows over the lines, expedition to the quarries, pack list, route markers, yields on return. Black follows, unhurried, the way caravans start at dawn because no desert ever agreed to be rushed. You write the starting place, Koptos on the Nile, then the road over Wadi Hammamat, the old scar through the eastern desert that knows the feet of many rains. Mainstream fact. Expeditions to Wadi Hammamat are recorded on quarry stele. Leaders and scribes carved their boasts in the stone, listing the crews, the gods invoked, and the bacon stone, grey waka, blocks they pried from the hills for statues and sarcophagi. Your nib seems to square its shoulders at the thought of its writing traveling to a place your sandals may never see. You begin the pack list like a quartermaster, with a sense of humor and a conscience. Donkeys, you write, then a number that will make the stableman frown and then agree. Water jars, sealed. Beer jars, bread loaves dried hard, dried fish, dates, figs, onions, because morale, oil for lamps, extra wicks, copper chisels, stone pounders of dolerite, wooden wedges, rope lengths, splints and salve, natron, Taben ovens, portable, and spare sandals, because you are kind to future feet. You add Kyphi cones, with a little question mark that is basically a love letter to night morale. First joke, you also write donkey exhale, ample, then cross it out because it's not exactly measurable, though it remains the expedition's truest resource. You mark the staff, stonemasons, haulers, water guards, cooks, a carpenter, a doctor with a kit that smells like resin and optimism, and 2 scribes, you and a colleague, because rocks produce numbers faster than a single pen should pretend to keep up. You list the foreman's name with a red dot of respect. A small rubric announces offerings to Hathor at Cerebit, and your wrist enjoys the itinerary leap, from the eastern desert to the Sinai's turquoise hills, where the goddess is Lady of Turquoise. You add a parent line for amethyst from Wadi el Hudi and granite from Aswan, because the stone road has many branches. Your log is a quiet map with ambitions. You copy a route note from an older exemplar. From Koptos to Hamamat. Way stations at the wells of Bir el Hamamat and Bir Hammam. Offer natron and let the men rest in the 3rd hour. Mainstream fact addendum. The Koptos Hamamat road linked the Nile to the Red Sea. Inscriptions and simple shelters mark ancient halts, and expeditions left their names carved on the wadi walls, sometimes with cartouches and sometimes with honest workmen's hands. You put a tiny red dot beside wells, the true bosses of any desert sentence. Quirky tidbit wanders in, sun hat askew. Some expeditions scratched little game boards, Senet grids, into flat rock near camp. In the log, you can't write pack the boredom, but you can note smooth boardstone 1 and smile at the thought of men hunched over pieces while the wind forgets to be cruel for a while. You also tuck in ostraca for messages and clay for seals, because even out there, the string needs a moon to press. Historians still argue whether expedition teams were seasonal, drawn from rotating village crews paid in rations and a bonus, or whether some trips leaned hard on pressed labor swept in from elsewhere. The stelae shout the leaders' names, the ostraca whisper the absences and excuses. You keep your log tone neutral and kindly, because paper is a place where hope can wear bureaucracy as a disguise and still feel seen. You write the first camp's rules: water ration, lamp discipline, no open flames near rope, no singing after the 2nd hour of night, the donkey lobby files an exception, and daily offerings to the road gods, which is your way of asking the wind to mind its manners. For the route itself, you draw small red ticks in the margin where landmarks deserve respect. A rock shaped like a sitting dog, a cairn that looks suspiciously like someone's sense of humor, a place where the wadi twists like a rope. The column becomes a footpath only eyes can walk. Now the quarry note proper. At the face of stone, set wedges, wet wood. Let the desert do its part. Mainstream fact. To lift blocks, Egyptians used pounding with dolerite balls to bruise granite, as at Aswan, and wedges driven into cut grooves. Water-swelled wood can coax stone to loosen its handshake. You add dolerite balls, count 20, imagining them thudding like careful thunder, 1 heartbeat per swing. You mention drag sledges with water poured ahead, because wet sand forgives the sled and doubles as a lullaby when poured from a jar with rhythm. You imagine the inscription you'll copy if you go, in year X, under the majesty of came NN, overseer of quarries, with so many men. He brought back blocks weighing multiples of the patience of donkeys. And then you tuck the imagination back into the margin. Your job is the tidy column, not the boast on a cliff. Still, you let yourself write, upon return, carve a stela at Wadi, because good memory deserves a wall. A line for offerings again. Hathor in Sinai gets turquoise and gratitude. Min of Koptos gets a nod at departure. Wep Wawet, opener of the ways, gets a bit of incense whenever the path behaves. You add a tiny rubric, say these softly, your own portable liturgy. Because even if historians still argue whether the quarry chapels saw daily rites or only festival ones, your column prefers the version where someone whispers thanks to the stone before asking it to move. You docket risks like a careful parent. Flash flood signs. Loose scree under the ledge. Snakes at shade. Heat fits. Rest. Eyes. Oil and coal against glare. Quirky tidbit, too. A thin smear of coal, galena, and oils reduces sun glare and probably discourages infection. The fashion that makes eyes dramatic also makes them practical. You add spare coal sticks with a smile that only your reed hears. Second joke, you do not add crocodile dung sunscreen because even the rumor deserves a nap. The desert has enough challenges without fragrance. The yield page waits with blank optimism. You create a tidy grid, line per block, quarry face noted, length, width, height, weight estimated by rule of thumb and experience, and the way 4 men complain when they lift one corner. You leave a column for incidentals, rope frayed, sledge axle replaced, portable oven cracked and mended, a jar broken but reported by an honest man. You put a small red dot by honesty. You set a space for return gifts. Turquoise chips offered to the temple, a clean dolerite ball for the overseer's grandson to roll in the courtyard and learn the weight of work. You think of the Sinai route and add a sidebar. Sarabit el Kadim. Offer at Hathor's shrine. Record the season. Return via the same. Avoid the talkative acacia with thorns. Third joke. You swear one acacia on that track gossips about every caravan and will snag your sleeve just to ask if you've packed enough onions. You mark a faint star where the turquoise hills begin. The color you'll never quite capture in ink but can at least announce with a rubric. Mainstream fact bows again. Quarry graffiti includes not only royal names, but sketches of boats, animals, and quick lists of crew. Evidence that the scribal impulse to leave "we were here, we did this" is older than any bedtime. You plan a scrap for the foreman to carry, a pocket log, men present, water drawn, blocks cut, spirits adequate. You'll collect it at return like a shoreline collecting driftwood and incorporate the numbers into the calm harbor of your columns. Historians still argue whether the Red Sea port at Mursa Wadi Gawasis later was supplied via this very desert road during certain rains, tying quarries, ships, and incense routes into one logistical braid, or whether separate corridors handled separate dreams. Your log keeps the braid plausible, with a gentle, if the ships are called, send rope lengths of such and such, and a note about timbers from the oasis carpenter. Reserve early. You end the section with a breath over the red well and a hand on the papyrus to test the curl, the document's own way of asking, "Will I travel?" Yes. Tied and sealed tomorrow, this sheet will ride in a courier's satchel, past your donkey friend who has already drafted a glowing letter of recommendation for himself. exhaled with distinction. Over the quay, through the alleys, into hands that will measure the jars and nod at your lines as if a map had just unfolded and offered to carry their feet. Your tidy grid will go farther than your sandals tonight, farther than your lamp ever could, out to stone faces that will accept a wedge, a prayer, and a patient count. Then come home in the shape of statues that blink the desert off their eyelids, and wait 1,000 years for someone else's reed to remember their names. You pivot from stone and roots to the gentler arithmetic of bellies. The supervisor slides over a narrow strip, wider than a ribbon, slimmer than a letter, and says, almost smiling, "Rations." You sharpen the reed with the little confident slice you trust, smooth the papyrus with your palm, and begin the calmest math in Egypt. How much bread? How much beer? How many onions to keep households convinced that the state remembers them by name as well as by number? Mainstream fact. In places like Deir el Medina, work crews and their scribes were paid in kind. Loaves, jugs of beer, henket, fish, oil, sometimes meat, carefully tallied by day and month. The paperwork for those rations is as real as footsteps in dust. Your nib sets out tidy rows, each line a table laid for tomorrow. You write for Masika, stonecutter, for Patu, plasterer, for Senu, who guards the gate and counts shoes at shift's end because there is always one mysterious sandal. You give the foreman's household an extra loaf and call it staff portion with a straight face. Red dots mark categories. Black carries the comfort. The numbers don't strut. They hum. You add onions more than a scribe strictly needs to write, because you've learned morale is not an abstract noun. It is alliums sliced. First joke, you consider adding a new line. Donkey exhale unlimited. But decide the treasury cannot quantify excellence. You draft a separate line for the night shift, your shift, because someone has to remember the mouths that stay awake to babysit the lamps. Quirky tidbit. On more than one ostracon from the workman's village, the beer ration is noted with a small flourish or a snarky aside, evidence that hops aren't the only ingredient. Humor ferments, too. Your own flourish is invisible, a ghost smile that makes the reed glide. You assign a little oil for lamps, a little castor for wicks, and a teaspoon of ink for every long week, even if ink ration mostly lives in the accounting imagination. It's the thought that counts, and the thought is soot tied to gum, a poem bound to a plant. The talk in the room shifts from hymns to jokes as gently as a lamp trades smoke for steadiness. The younger scribe across the aisle rolls his wrist and says, "Another list? Better this than brick molds." You answer with the old schoolroom favorite from the satire of the trades, murmuring, "The bricklayer is worn, his ribs are a ruin, the scribe is inside, cool, dictating." You let the line trail off before it stings. Teasing is a spice, not a stew. Mainstream fact addendum. The satire really does market the scribe's life as superior. Fewer blisters, more benches. It sells because ink smells better than mud when you're trying to sleep. You allot cloth. One tunic here, a belt there, on festival cycles, and note the month when sandals will arrive like tame boats for streets. Historians still argue whether scribes consistently received larger rations than artisans, or simply enjoyed steadier access to extras, like oil and fine flour when schedules went sideways. Ledgers suggest both fairness and favoritism, depending on which column you stare at. Tonight, your column chooses competence. Even numbers, even tempers. You add a line for bonus at completion. Bread plus beer, nothing flashy, because finishing a tomb or a wall or a season deserves the edible equivalent of a bow. A boy ducks in with a tray, small cups that smell like barley and faint dates, the night's legal caffeine. You sip, and the world nods from the eyebrows down. The cup leaves a wet ring on your blotting linen shaped like a perfect cartouche for refreshment. Second joke. You consider registering the ring as an official seal. Office of the Department of Hydration, witness my cup. You set the cup away from the red well before the two decide to collaborate on modern art across your margins. Pay isn't just jars, it's job weather. Scribes float past certain chores, hauling stone, digging canals, unless the world truly tips. The prestige smells faintly of gum and good posture. Your fingers, permanently smudged near the nails, are a quiet badge. Ink-stained, respected, occasionally envied. You take more teasing than orders. You trade more words than blows. You get invited to solve problems people don't want sung into public. The perk sheet is invisible and very real. You slide a new strip under the weight and write, sick list. Teeth, mostly. Backs, a close second. You assign a little extra beer for the man whose mother is ailing, because beer is pain's cousin, and sometimes knows how to sit with it. You jot, fish for Sherrit, pregnant, because someone told you last market day, and you remembered between rubrics. Historians still argue whether such discretionary kindness lived in the official numbers or in the gray nap of practice where supervisors smoothed rough corners without confessing it to the archive. You shelter your kindness in the word adjustment and move on. Content. Quirky tidbit folds its arms and leans against your shoulder. Somewhere in a box in this very building lives a fragmentary list of insults and comebacks. Schoolboys practicing banter as if it were grammar. Your handwriting is like a drunk ibis. One line teases. The retort proposes, at least my ibis can spell. You keep your ibis sober and let a funny tale creep into one letter on purpose just to earn a glare from across the aisle. The younger scribe notices, chokes down a grin, and corrects his own tale so perfectly it could lead a procession. You glance at the water clock and find that money, like water, is happiest when it knows where to go next. The elder marks the notch. You reward your own wrists with a fig. The gecko clicks on the lintel, 1, 2, then stops, having paid its taxes in charm. Outside, the donkey produces a meditative exhale to announce that wages are, in the long run, whatever keeps a body standing between dawns. You pencil, in diluted black, a tiny note to yourself at the margin. Send rope maker's cousin 2 onions. Mother's letter. The margin is where the human sneaks past the clerk with the clerk's full permission. You draft the quarterly clothing issue and add a remark about finer linen for scribes on festival days. Not because ink deserves better fabric, but because festival ink does. You note, coal, small jar, each. Practical sun medicine, masquerading as beauty. A third joke, you write sunscreen and then cross it out with a smile, because remember that crocodile dung rumor? You'll die of laughter before sun if you try that. You list natron for bathing, a little resin for the chests, and the tiniest note, perfume cones, with a skeptical dot, as if you're asking the Treasury whether wigs may smell like a dessert once a year. Mainstream fact returns wearing sandals. In lieu of coin, value is tracked in Daben. Weights of copper or silver, and equivalent goods are counted against it, a mental ledger tied to metal, though metal rarely changes hands outside major transactions. You include a neat conversion in microscript at the bottom of one strip. 10 loaves, 1 Hecate beer X in copper. so the next clerk won't have to wake the sleeping math. The strip looks suddenly like an abacus decided to try poetry. The jokes pick up when you get to tools allowance. Carpenter wants a new adze, the younger says. Tell him our pen filed for a sharper nib, pending a donkey exhale certification. You sign the imaginary request with 2 red dots that mean approved in spirit. The supervisor pretends not to hear, and by pretending, approves, because a room that laughs softly files smoother. Historians still argue whether scribal families formed subtle dynasties inside workmen's villages. Inheritance of benches, pallets passed down like heirlooms, or whether mobility was wider, with talent sliding wherever a vacancy yawned. The ostraca hint at fathers and sons sharing school texts, at cousins accusing each other of stealing reed knives, at palettes that have seen 3 generations of wrists. You write for The Apprentice, a small palette, and enjoy the future in miniature. Another frog charm, another water clock, another person learning the art of ink breathing. You total the rations: bread, beer, onions, oil, occasional fish, and draw the red bar that means checked. The column ends like a balanced tray. You add a docket to the back, rations log, Shemu 2, and set it under a jar shard so the curl thinks twice. You rub your thumb across the ink stain near your nail and realize you love this badge more than any jewelry. It's proof that words passed through your hand and didn't get lost on the way to somebody's supper. The lamp wants a whisper of oil. You pour it. The wick wants a trim. You pinch it. The room wants one more small joke before the totals sleep. You give it 1. If the bricklayer is worn and the fisherman smells like forever, you say, the scribe is tired in beautiful ways and smells like lamp and gum. The others snort softly, which is the exact size of laughter a scriptorium allows. Your reed, smug but not insufferable, nestles across the pallet while the water clock gives the hour a polite cough. Pay is counted, perks are penciled, jokes are filed, and your ink-stained fingers rest on the bench like small, proud signatures the night will remember when it needs something steady to hold. The next packet wears a green cord and an attitude. The seal shows a cartouche, royal name in an oval hug. So even before you untie it, the page has already put on jewelry. You set the cord aside, square the sheet, and breathe into that tone your hand understands without being told. Decree speed, the careful stride of a voice that expects to be repeated. Year X, month Y, day Z, you write, then the formula that walks ahead of kings like a herald. Thus says the king. Life, prosperity, health. Black holds the body. Red touches the cartouche and those divine names that act like careful doorways. Mainstream fact. Egyptian royal decrees open with regnal dating and a thus says formula, then lay out exemptions, appointments, taxes, or punishments. Some get copied on papyrus for files, others carved on stele for the sun to read. Your reed, suddenly very upright, keeps the lines marching like small, polite soldiers. This one scolds corruption with the patience of a parent. Officials shall not seize boats unasked. Clerks shall not borrow grain that forgets to come home. You think of Horemheb's famous edict after the Amarna swirl, its lists of fines for busy-fingered officials, and you let that memory steady your hand. Historians still argue whether such edicts were teeth that bit or just very official gums, a public performance of virtue to frighten petty appetites. Your column votes for usefulness. Whatever the politics, a clean sentence makes honest people feel less alone. The decree appoints a new inspector for the West Granary, the very stacks you've been counting, and you savor the loop closing. Your ink about rations meets the king's ink about rules. You mark the office title with a red dot. First joke. You resist adding "and a lifetime supply of donkey exhale" as an official perk. The chancery would send a letter. The donkey would co-sign. You copy the penalty scale exactly, down to the X blows and repayment times Y. Then add a neat docket to the back so a future clerk can find this sheet faster than a cat finds the warmest tile. The supervisor taps a second piece from the royal packet, this one gentler. A tax remission for a small temple after a flood that pretended to be too generous. You write the name of the god, the place, the remission, the time limit, and a red line that functions like ribbon around a gift. Mainstream fact addendum. Many decrees grant privileges to temples, immunity for certain workers, tax breaks, protection for processional roads. Such favors get carved on boundary stele and recopied like good news that refuses to evaporate. You savor the moment where law puts on its soft voice and still means it. Without warning, the pile shifts from palace to eternity. The next roll is funerary. Smooth, slightly scented, margins generous like courtyards. Its first line, the offering formula you could write in your sleep. An offering which the king gives, HTP DI Edisana West to Osiris, Lord of Jedu. 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, 1,000 of oxen and fowl. You let the red lift the names higher than nouns. Black stacks the gifts in neat columns that sound like a pantry rearranged into prayer. You've always liked how the same hand that writes grain, 6 car, can also write 1,000 of bread with the exact same calm. The afterlife appreciates good bookkeeping. A shiver of spell work follows. Coming forth by day, phrases glide in, comforting and famished, and your wrist changes gear. Fewer numbers, more feathers. You copy the negative confessions with that unshowy dignity a page deserves. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not stopped water flowing. Historians still argue whether these declarations are moral inventory, ritual passcodes, or both, and whether their order mattered as much as their recital. Manuscripts vary, as if souls enjoyed bespoke playlists. You keep the rubric to be spoken in red, because directions make courage easier. Quirky tidbit pads in wearing a small green scarab, heart scarabs, amulets carved with spell 30B, tell the owner's heart not to testify against its person on Judgment Day. The text is wonderfully practical for a prayer. Do not stand as a witness against me. You copy that clause into the margin notes. Yes, margins get theology, because the artisan who will paint a scarab on the vignette will come looking. You grin in your throat at the spell's kindly bluntness. Second joke, you admire its energy. Dear heart, please do not snitch, and promise your own rib resident editor a raise if it behaves. A set of labels for Shabti, little worker figures, waits their turn. You write the tiny work order that wakes them in the field of reeds. If I am called to carry, you shall say, "Here I am," and do it. You reduce your letters until they fit a figurine's sash, but not so small the afterlife squints. Quirky tidbit 2. Some wealthy burials include 365 Shabti plus overseers, 1 per day. Proof that even paradise invented shift schedules. Historians still argue whether most households believed Shabti truly spared them labor or served as status symbols that whispered, "I could delegate if I wished." You write the text as if delegation were an act of mercy, which, on hot days, feels theologically sound. Now a decree again, funerary of a different kind, a tomb curse in the mild legalese of eternity. As for anyone who shall do harm to this place, the great council shall seize him. His name shall not endure. You copy without drama, noting how threats prefer red for divine enforcement and black for municipal. It's less doom than please don't, the cosmic version of a library sign about quiet. Third joke, you consider adding, and may your lamp smoke forever, but that's too cruel. Even villains deserve trimmed wicks. Your read remembers to soften for the vignette captions. The weighing of the heart, the ferryman's name, the field boundary, the sycamore of nut. Mainstream fact returns with a fact you love. Ma'at's feather stands on the scale pan as standard and mercy. You write true of voice beside the owner's name, the desired verdict, light enough to float, honest enough to ring. You blot a shiny spot near the feather's caption, because truth prefers matte. Between lines you slide a small world into place, the opening of the mouth ritual, the list of implements, adze, spoon, foreleg, each with its caption. The jars marked Happy, Duamutef, Imseti, Kebesenuef, sons of Horus with their specialty customer service. You write their names in red, like polite name tags at an immortal conference. Historians still argue whether every household understood these lists intimately, or whether priests carried most of the script, while families held the pictures like lullabies. Your page gives both words and pictures somewhere soft to land. The lamp fugues for a breath. You pinch and feed. The flame returns with the humble competence of a well-trained clerk. You glance at the frog charm, still the assistant timekeeper, and it nods because frogs always look like nodding is their baseline state. The donkey in the alley gifts the night its signature exhale, and you mark the moment with a red divider that feels, inexplicably, like a blessing. Your bench has become a border station, where worldly orders and otherworldly forms share ink and take turns. A final royal line. Let this decree be placed in the house of life, copied where needed, read aloud on the first day of the season. You docket the verso. Decree, appointments, flood remission, copy orders, and stack it with the funerary sheet whose last sentence curls peacefully at the edge. May he go forth by day like a living Ba. The 2 pages, side by side, look like cousins, one managerial, one metaphysical, both wearing black and red like siblings in festival linen. The same soot, the same gum, the same reed, the same lamp. Different destinations, same handwriting. Historians still argue whether Scribes felt that double life, civil servant and quiet theologian, or whether a page was a page and the hand simply followed the model. Your hand feels the hinge. When you write fines, you square your shoulders. When you write feathers, you lower them. Either way, the wrist doesn't judge. It measures. You set both rolls to dry under patient sherds, one carved with a lion, the other with a lotus, and the room exhales its agreement. Somewhere, a gecko claims a winged snack. Somewhere else, a priest wakes to the first shift's bath in natron. Your lamp writes a small coin of gold on the papyrus. The water clock says another droplet worth of law and afterlife has passed. You straighten the palette, wipe the nib on linen until it remembers its manners, and feel the seam of night thinning. The place where Section 15 will put away the tools, stitch the bundles, and walk you out into a sunrise that reads the city like a fresh rubric. The last column leans back, satisfied, and you give it one gentle breath so the shine turns to manners. You set the reed across the palette like a bird settling on a reed bed, and lift the clay weights one by one, each a small moon retiring from the tide. The room, obedient to the idea of endings, drops its shoulders. You nudge the lamp wick a hair shorter. Morning prefers smaller flames. And start the quiet choreography of putting memory away so future hands can find it. You roll the finished sheet with the same care you used to unroll it. Inner margin first, firm but not fierce, so the grain doesn't learn bad habits. The seam passes under your thumb like a river stone. Mainstream fact. Egyptians store papyri rolled rather than folded, with a docket written on the back or outer turn so a clerk can identify the text without opening it. Sometimes a clay ceiling or knotted cord secures the roll. Sometimes a simple tie of palm fiber does. You add a neat docket. Granary receipts and letters, Shemu 2. Then loop the palm cord twice and tuck the end so the knot holds. Modest and competent. A little dish of damp clay waits. You give it the lightest knead. Pinch a pea-sized pellet and press it over the knot. Your scarab ring. Stubborn beetle, determined to look important, bites its impression. The lion on the supervisor's seal jogs alongside for official companionship. Together they make a tiny parade trapped in mud. You blow across the pellet out of habit. First joke, you whisper, "Hold that pose," and the lion, who has been mid-sprint for centuries, appreciates the pep talk. Temple sheets stack next to civic ones like cousins who share shoes. The hymn and offerings roll lies down with its red eyebrows still looking wise. The funerary captions keep their small, serious smiles. You docket each with a hand that has learned the shape of patience. The frog charm, promoted earlier to assistant timekeeper, supervises the procession to the storage chest from its string like a tiny foreman in a green coat. The chest itself is not grand. Plastered wood, smell of gum and dust. But it is the house of memory for this room. Shelves inside divide by subject. Temple, granary, letters, decrees, expeditions. Mainstream fact addendum. Archives in temple, houses of life, and administrative offices were likely wooden cupboards or chests. Clay jars also held bundles in some places, but the organizing logic lived in dockets and bundles more than in furniture. You lay the rolls in their lanes and pause after each to say their names under your breath. You don't believe in magic labels. You believe in a clerk who remembers. Historians still argue whether archivists used hanging tags or attached title slips to the outer turn of the roll, or simply trusted the docketed back. Some surviving rolls show external notes. Some show only verso endorsements. Your shop's habit is docket plus order. Newest to the left, oldest to the right. A river of paper flowing gently toward the past. You set the royal decree near the front where hands will ask for it, and tuck the quarry log where sand won't dream of it. A small, ridiculous happiness taps your ribs. Everything fits. Nothing sulks. You close the chest. The latch clicks with the audible punctuation of a line ending correctly. Quirky tidbit. More than one ancient roll got its second life as cartonnage. Layers glued into mummy cases, which means badly filed words sometimes survived only by becoming someone's armor for eternity. You pat the chest as if to promise your rolls better fates than being pressed into noses and toes. The chest accepts the pat as rent. Back at the bench, you wash the pallet's wells with 2 capfuls of clean water, circling away the last soot and sunset. The rinse swirls like a galaxy, then dims to a sensible gray you pour into the floor dust where no scroll will later sit. The reed tips get their end-of-shift spa, a rub on the beeswax sliver, a gentle pinch to close the slit, a kiss to the sponge to relax fibers. You slide each reed into its case, points turned inward, never at the words, never at yourself. Second joke. You tell the reeds, "You performed admirably. Take the rest of the century," and they pretend not to preen, which is how reeds say thank you. You fold the blotting linen along its cleanest edge so tomorrow will feel invited. You rinse the knife, draw it once along the whetstone, and lay it to sleep. The sponge returns to its cup like a moon to its tide. The pestle dries on a shard that has seen more sunsets than gossip. The fan at the doorway gets a final 2 lazy sweeps in case smoke has ideas about staying past its welcome. The lamp, loyal as a donkey that knows the route by hooves alone, receives a breath and a pinch. The flame becomes a seed again and then a memory. Dawn tests the courtyard with one pale finger. The reed screen at the window blushes from brown to honey. The gecko signs the minutes once, tiny click, then decides its shift is respectfully over. You step to the water clock and listen to the last droplet land like a bead dropped into a cloth pouch. You mark the slat and smile at the neatness of an hour that ended exactly where the bowl decided it should. The frog charm makes one final ceremonial wobble, then hangs as still as a decree. You lift the sealed bundles to the courier tray by the door. Upriver, across town, inside the complex. The one to Mother waits under the rope receipt, ready to hitch a ride with the cousin who walks the city like a map in sandals. You set a mint leaf, good for mosquitoes, excellent for mothers, under its string, a harmless superstition that smells like care. Outside, a runner clears his throat. You hear the warm leather creak of readiness. You hear sandals remember streets. A gull from the river gives a single syllable like a chalk mark. The courtyard's bricks release their stored night in the softest exhale. And yes, from the alley, the donkey issues his credential. One grand, reassuring sigh that says the world can be handled in measured breaths. Third joke. You mentally notarize the exhale as duly performed. Then consider awarding it Employee of the Month. The frog objects, silently, but only in the way frogs object to anything that isn't a fly. You sweep the bench with your palm to catch any stray reed shavings and deposit them in the bowl marked Later. Later is a religion here. It keeps never from building a temple. You mop the floor dust where your rinse dried, turn the shutter so the room will greet morning with a friendly squint, and pinch the wick one last time to be certain no ember nurses ambitions. Everything wooden becomes wood again. Everything inky becomes tools again. Everything breathing becomes slower. Mainstream fact returns for a parting bow. Scribal names sometimes appear in colophons, sometimes not. The archive remembers the hand by style more often than by self-advertisement. You leave no signature tonight, only neat columns and a docket that can find them. Historians still argue whether that anonymity felt like humility or simply normal practice. Your wrists report mild satisfaction either way. You lift the bar from the door, tuck your palette under your arm the way a baker tucks a board, and step into a courtyard that smells like clean clay and faint Kyphi trailing its last sentence. The sky over the palm tops goes from ink to linen to shy gold. Somewhere, in a kitchen no scribe will ever inventory. Bread splits in the oven with a sound like a good idea arriving. You shoulder the door gently closed, let the latch find itself without being told, and walk toward the river along an alley that has learned your footfall and decided to approve. Dawn carries all your tiny victories, saved strokes, neat rubrics, rescued tales, sealed knots, like grain in a cool jar. The city wakes in polite waves, a watchman's staff traded from right hip to left, a woman pouring water along a doorstep, a heron stepping into itself on the bank, a fairy pole lifting its own shadow. You think, not loudly, that while kings shout across walls and gods glow on ceilings, it is the small handwriting of nights like this that keeps the day from forgetting why it got up. And then you smile because that's too grand for someone who smells like gum and lamp. You adjust your palette, let the mint at the window give you one last wave, and follow the line of light down to the Nile where boats are already copying the horizon. You stand a while where the bank turns from cool stone to warm, and you let the new light unspool across the water in long, friendly sentences. The breeze that spent the night organizing lamp smoke now moves slower, like a page turning itself. You don't plan anything. Planning is for ink. This part is for breath. The sounds soften at the edges. Oars dip with the care of someone laying a sleeping child back on a mat. A gull tries one more note, changes its mind, and keeps the rest for later. The donkey, who has already provided his official exhale, settles into a comfortable silence that feels like a blanket over your knees. Even the gecko on the lintel seems to dream with its eyes open. You think of the rolls you tied, black for the body, red for the guidance, and you imagine them resting in the chest as if in small boats moored in a quiet harbor. Names on their sides, knots remembering how to hold. If anyone opens that chest today, they will find your night arranged for their morning. Places to begin, places to end, places to stand and wait while the ink finishes turning from shine to soft. You picture the frog charm asleep against the shelf, a tiny guardian that only needs to nod when someone gets it right. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the tongue rest heavy and friendly behind your teeth, as if it has just finished pronouncing something precise and earned its simple weight. The fan you leaned by the door will still be there tonight, and the lamp will still accept a pinch and a pour, and the reeds will accept their little haircuts without complaint. The river keeps your secrets in a mild, unjudging way. Breathe in the clay, the hint of acacia gum, the last thread of Kyphi. Breathe out the lists, the names, the totals that stand up straight on their own now. The sky folds itself wider. Your steps grow slower. You walk home through the honey light, and every doorway looks like a rubric promising rest.